The day bled out the same way it always did, a gray fade into a bruised purple over the rooftops of other apartment buildings, each window a tiny, indifferent eye. I kicked my shoes off by the door, the sound echoing a little too loudly in the quiet of my 14th floor box. My tie came next, a silk noose I was glad to be free of. Slumped on the couch, the worn fabric sighing under my weight, I let my brain finally unspool. Cunningham. The name was a sour taste in my mouth. Fucking Cunningham and his last-minute synergy project. I could feel the tension still humming in my shoulders. To escape, I pulled out my phone, the screen a bright portal away from my own head. I scrolled, and scrolled, and scrolled. A mindless thumb flick through other people's perfect lives. A dumb meme, a political argument, the usual digital sludge. Then, a thought, barely formed, surfaced from the muck. I need to get out of here. Maybe a long weekend. Somewhere with rocks and sky instead of concrete and glass. The Zion Narrows, maybe. I'd seen pictures. Hiking waist-deep in a river, cutting through a canyon. Yeah, that sounded right. I blinked, and there it was. Sandwiched between a video of a cat falling off a chair and my cousin's baby pictures, a sponsored ad. Vivid orange sandstone. A sliver of turquoise water. The headline screamed, "Zion National Park, your ultimate canyon adventure awaits." I sat up straight. A cold little worm squirmed in my gut. Jesus, I muttered to the empty room. They listening to my fucking thoughts now? I shook my head, a cynical laugh escaping my lips. Must have searched for it months ago and forgot. Or maybe I said the word hike out loud. The algorithms are just that good. It's not magic, it's just invasive tech. I tossed the phone onto the cushion beside me, dismissing it. Still, the worm kept squirming. I decided a beer was in order. As I stood up, the living room plunged into a sudden flickering blue light. The smart TV had turned itself on. My heart gave a hard thump against my ribs. On the screen, the YouTube app was open. A video was already playing. A drone shot, soaring over the exact same orange canyons from the ad. A cheerful, vlogger-type voice filled the apartment. Hey guys, what's up? Today we're talking about my top 5 tips for tackling the incredible Zion Narrows hike. My beer was forgotten. What the hell? I fumbled for the remote, my eyes scanning the coffee table. It was right there, next to a stack of mail, nothing touching it. No way the buttons got pressed. I grabbed it, my thumb jabbing the power button. The screen went black. The vlogger's voice vanished. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I stood there for a long moment, remote in hand, just listening to the hum of the refrigerator. It was a glitch, a power surge, a Wi-Fi hiccup that triggered the last viewed app. There were a dozen logical reasons. But the ad, and now this, it was too perfect. I walked over to the TV and ran my finger along the bezel, as if I could physically check it for tampering. Then a thought struck me, colder and sharper than the rest. Wait, I never logged into YouTube on this TV. I bought it 2 months ago and never bothered. It was just for Netflix. My hand flew to my pocket, but my phone wasn't there. Right, on the couch. I turned back and saw it. The screen was dark. I walked over, my bare feet suddenly very aware of the cold floor. I picked it up. As my fingers made contact, the screen lit up. A notification from my calendar app. Reminder in 5 minutes. Watch Zion Review. I had never set that. I never set reminders for anything except work meetings and my sister's birthday. My thumb trembled as I tried to swipe it away. It wouldn't budge. I tried again, harder. Nothing. A small gray box appeared at the bottom of the screen. Error. Cannot modify event. My breath hitched. This wasn't a glitch. This was not a coincidence. This was an action. Someone was doing this. The screen flickered. Once. Twice. Then it went completely black. For a heart-stopping second, I thought it was dead. Then, 2 words appeared on the lock screen, glowing in a plain, white, sans serif font. Like it? I dropped the phone like it was hot coals. It clattered onto the hardwood floor. I just stared at it, at those 2 words. The question felt mocking. Alive. My heart was a frantic drum against my sternum. I backed away from the phone, my eyes darting around the apartment. The windows, The single door. Everything looked the same. The same beige walls. The same generic art I bought to make the place feel less like a cell. But it didn't feel the same. The air was thick. I felt watched. Then I heard it. A sound so small I almost missed it. A soft click from the front door. It was the sound of a key being slid into the lock, but missing. The scrape of metal on metal just for a barest fraction of a second. Every muscle in my body went rigid. I stopped breathing. The hum of the fridge, the distant traffic, my own frantic pulse, it all vanished. There was only that single, impossible sound and the crushing silence that followed. Someone was on the other side of my door, on the 14th floor, in a building with key fob access. My mind raced, scrambling for a weapon. The kitchen knives felt too far away. My eyes landed on the old aluminum baseball bat propped in the corner, a relic from a company softball league I'd quit years ago. I snatched it up, the cold metal a small, solid comfort in my sweating palm. I didn't make a sound. I crept across the floor, my weight on the balls of my feet, my back pressed against the wall next to the door. I strained my ears, listening. Silence. A minute stretched into an eternity. Was it my imagination? Had the sound of my own panic finally manifested as something real? Then, the doorknob began to turn. Slowly. Deliberately. Without a sound. I watched it rotate, a quarter turn to the left, straining against the deadbolt. It stopped, held there for a few seconds. Then it silently rotated back. They were testing it. Checking. My throat was bone dry. I was holding the bat in a white-knuckled grip, ready to swing at whatever came through that door. More silence. My own breathing was a roaring storm in my ears. I willed myself to be quiet, to be invisible. Click. The sound came again. But this time it wasn't from the front door. It came from the balcony. My blood ran cold. The balcony door was a sliding glass pane, 30 feet away, across the living room. It had a simple latch lock, a flimsy thing I never thought twice about. The threat wasn't just at the door anymore, it was on both sides. It was surrounding me. I was trapped. Panic, sharp and blinding, clawed at my throat. I couldn't stay here. I had to see. I had to know. The front door had a peephole. If I could just see who or what was in the hall. Holding the bat low, I shuffled the few feet to the door. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. I raised my eye to the small, fisheye lens. The hallway was empty. The cream-colored walls were lit by the sterile overhead lights. The door to my neighbor's apartment, 14B, was closed and quiet. There was no one. Not a shadow, not a flicker of movement. Nothing. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me. It was so powerful, it almost buckled my knees. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, a ragged, shuddering gasp. My mind screamed at me. A prank. A sick fucking prank. Some kid in the building with a hacked Wi-Fi network. It was a stupid, flimsy explanation, but it was the only thing standing between me and screaming my lungs out. It had to be a prank. Still leaning against the door, I took another deep, shaky breath. It's over. Whatever it was, it's over. I turned around, and my heart stopped. On the large, frameless mirror hanging on the opposite wall, the one directly across from the front door, a message was written. It wasn't in ink or paint. It was written in the ghostly, ephemeral condensation of a human breath against the cold glass. The letters were already beginning to fade at the edges. Can't hide. Sleep hadn't come. It was a foreign country I didn't have a visa for. I spent the night on the couch, the aluminum bat resting against the cushion next to me, my eyes burning holes into the front door. Every creak of the building settling, every distant siren, was a new spike of adrenaline. The words on the mirror had long since faded, but they were burned onto the back of my eyelids. Can't hide. When the first dirty gray light of dawn seeped through the windows, I forced myself to move. My joints protested, my whole body a single, tight knot of tension. It was a prank. It had to be. Some tech-savvy asshole in the building. Some kid with a botnet and a sick sense of humor. I repeated it like a mantra, a prayer to the god of rational thought. It was the only explanation that didn't involve me completely losing my mind. I walked to the kitchen, the cold floor, a shock to my bare feet. I needed coffee. I needed the routine, the simple, brainless act of scooping grounds and pouring water. It was an anchor in a world that had come unmoored. As the machine gurgled to life, I took the bat and did a slow, methodical sweep of the apartment. I checked the lock on the balcony door. Secure. I checked the deadbolt on the front door. Still thrown. No signs of forced entry. Nothing out of place except my sanity. Fucking psycho, I muttered to the empty air, the sound of my own voice ragged and strange. The coffee maker beeped. I poured the black liquid into a mug, my hands shaking just slightly. I leaned against the counter, taking a sip. It was bitter, hot, real. Some little shit is going to get a visit from the cops, I promised myself. I'd call the building management, report a network breach, a cyber harassment case. There were steps. There were logical adult things to do. To drown out the humming in my own head, I grabbed my phone from the counter where I'd left it. I needed noise. A podcast. Anything. I tapped the green Spotify icon. The app opened. My thumb went to the search bar but stopped. My eyes locked on the recently played section. It was a single playlist, one I had never seen before. The cover was a grainy photo of a rain-streaked window. The title was simple, For Rainy Nights. I stared at it. The name meant nothing. I tapped on it. A list of songs appeared. Old, sad indie rock, bands I hadn't heard in years. The kind of mournful, navel-gazing music I couldn't stand. But Lynn had loved it. A cold dread, heavier and more solid than last night's panic, settled in my gut. This was her playlist. Not a copy, not a similar vibe. This was hers. I remembered her huddled on my old couch 2 years ago, telling me this was the only thing that understood her. My mind scrambled for an out. Maybe she still had my login info from when we were together? It was a flimsy shield, and I knew it. We hadn't spoken in 2 years. She wouldn't just randomly log into my account in the middle of the night to listen to a single playlist. Why would she? And why this one? Heh. My thumb hovered over the delete button. A surge of angry violation went through me. I was going to erase it, reclaim this small piece of my own digital space. Get her out of my phone, out of my head. But before I could press it, the screen changed. A notification banner slid down from the top. A new email. The sender was a random string of letters and numbers. HGF123@mail.com. The subject line was 2 words. Nice playlist. My heart hammered against my ribs. I dropped the coffee mug. It shattered on the tile floor, splashing hot liquid and ceramic shards across my feet. I didn't feel it. I couldn't feel anything except the ice water shock flooding my veins. My hand was trembling so hard I could barely tap the notification to open the full email. The body of the message was a single sentence. Been a while since you heard Lynn sing this one, huh? No, that wasn't possible. That was a secret. A small, private thing from a life I had buried. Lynn, a terrible singer but full of heart, humming that one specific, off-key melody from the 3rd song on the list while she made us dinner in this very kitchen. No one else was there. No one else ever knew. It wasn't a story I told. It was a memory locked in a box, and someone had just picked the lock and dumped the contents out on my floor. Who are you? The question was a choked-out whisper. My eyes darted around the apartment again, but this time I wasn't looking for an intruder. I was looking for a camera, a microphone, something, anything to explain how they knew. The walls felt like they were shrinking, the air thinning out. The smart speaker on my nightstand, the little black dot of my laptop's camera, the phone in my hand. It was all compromised. Every part of my life was a stage, and I was the unwilling actor. I backed away from the phone on the floor, leaving it in the puddle of coffee. I felt watched. I felt known. The terror was no longer about a physical threat at the door. It was about an invisible presence that had crawled inside my past. Then the sound came. From the bedroom. A soft crackle of static, then a voice. It was a recording, tinny and warped, as if played through a cheap, broken speaker. But I knew the voice. God help me, I knew it. It was Lynn. Anne, her voice distorted and looping. Anne, help me. It was a fragment, a corrupted piece of audio, but it was her. A wave of pure white-hot rage erupted in my chest, burning away the fear. This had gone too far. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a game. This was a desecration. "Shut up!" I roared, the sound tearing from my throat. I stormed toward the bedroom, my bare feet crunching on the broken ceramic, not even registering the sting. The looped recording played on, a pathetic, ghostly plea. "Anne, help me." I saw it on the nightstand, the black cylinder of the smart speaker, the blue light pulsing softly with her stolen voice. I didn't slow down. I grabbed it, ripped the cord from the wall, and with a guttural scream of fury, I threw it as hard as I could against the opposite wall. It exploded in a shower of black plastic and electronic guts. The sound of her voice died instantly. Silence crashed back into the room, broken only by my own ragged, heaving breaths. I stood there, chest rising and falling, my fists clenched, staring at the wreckage I had made. The rage subsided, leaving behind a hollow, shaking emptiness. My eyes drifted over the debris scattered across the beige carpet, a piece of the circuit board, a tangle of colored wires, a magnet from the speaker driver, and something else. Something small that glinted in the morning light. It wasn't a piece of technology. It was silver. My breath caught. I knelt down, my knees pressing into the carpet. My hand, still trembling, reached out and picked it up from the wreckage. It was smooth and cold and terribly, horribly familiar. It was an earring. A small, silver star. The one I gave Lynn for our 1-year anniversary. The one she'd been frantic about losing the last time she ever came over to my apartment. The one she swore had just vanished. She hadn't lost it. It had been here all this time, dropped, slipped, hidden, or placed. The breath on the mirror. The earring from the speaker. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a hacker 1,000 miles away. Whoever it was, they had been inside my home. Last night. Standing over my electronics. Standing over my memories. Standing over me. And they had left a souvenir. The silver star was cold in my palm. Colder than metal had any right to be. The cheap plastic guts of the speaker were scattered around my knees like the aftermath of a tiny, pathetic explosion. The fury was gone, burned out, leaving a hollow space inside my chest that the morning light couldn't fill. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a hacker. Ghosts don't drop earrings. Hackers don't break into your home to plant them inside your electronics. Someone was here, last night, in my apartment, while I slept on the couch with a useless baseball bat for protection. My mind, scrambling for a foothold, latched onto the only name connected to that piece of silver. Leah. It didn't make sense. 2 years of silence, and then this? A campaign of psychological warfare involving hacked accounts and breaking and entering? It was insane. It was a movie plot. But it was the only thread I had. My hand was shaking as I picked up my phone from the floor, my thumb smearing the drying coffee on the screen. I found her name in my contacts. The picture was old, from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. I pressed the call button before I could talk myself out of it. The phone rang twice. A third time. I was about to hang up, a new wave of foolishness washing over me, when the call connected. "Hello?" Her voice was thick with sleep, annoyed. "Leah?" My own voice was a dry rasp. A pause. "Alex? What the hell? Do you know what time it is?" "The playlist, Leah. The one on my Spotify. For rainy nights." "What are you talking about?" The sleepiness was being replaced by irritation. "And the earring," I pushed on, my words tumbling over each other. "The silver star, the one you lost here. I just found it." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear the rustle of sheets. "Okay, I'm hanging up," she said, her voice sharp now. "I don't know what you're on, but you need to stop. I haven't used your Spotify in years, and I have no idea what you're talking about with an earring. I have both of them. My new boyfriend bought me a new pair." "No, the one I gave you." "Alex, leave me alone," she snapped, and the words were like a slap. "It's 7 a.m. We broke up 2 years ago. Get a grip." The line went dead. I stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. I lowered it slowly. Stupid. I was so stupid. She wasn't playing a game. She was living her life, with a new boyfriend, with new earrings. The past was only alive in my apartment. The thread I'd been holding onto snapped, and I was falling again, with nothing below me. I needed to get out of my head. Work. I had a deadline. A stupid, meaningless presentation about quarterly growth that suddenly felt like the most important thing in the world. It was normal. It was sane. I walked over to the small desk crammed in the corner of my living room. I had been working from home for so long the space had become a permanent annex of my anxiety. I sat down, the worn-out cushion of the office chair sighing under my weight. I reached for my laptop. And I stopped. A piece of black electrical tape covered the webcam. I'd put it there months ago, a small concession to a vague sense of digital paranoia. Last night, before I'd finally passed out on the couch, I'd pressed it down. I distinctly remembered running my thumb over it, making sure it was flush against the casing. Now, one corner was peeled back. It was lifted just a few millimeters, clinging crookedly, a tiny black dog ear against the silver frame. No, my breath hitched. My heart, which had just started to settle into a dull thud, began to pick up speed again. It's nothing. Maybe the adhesive is old. It came loose. But I knew better. I knew I'd pressed it down flat. My hand, moving as if detached from my body, reached out and opened the laptop. The screen flickered to life. The familiar startup chime sounded off, but today it sounded like a warning bell. I waited for my usual wallpaper to appear, a generic, calming picture of a mountain range. It never did. Instead, the screen resolved into a photograph. My blood ran cold. It was a picture of my own desk. This desk, the one I was sitting at. The angle was low, as if taken from the floor. Everything was there. The half-empty coffee cup from 2 days ago, the stack of mail I needed to sort, the pen lying next to the mouse pad. But there was one detail that was wrong. The office chair, the one I was currently sitting in, was pulled back from the desk, angled slightly towards the door. The room was empty, but the chair was pulled out. As if someone had just gotten up and walked away. Someone had taken a picture of my empty room and set it as my wallpaper. What the hell? Then, it happened. My eyes were glued to the screen, trying to process the violation, when I saw it. The cursor. The little white arrow. It twitched. It moved, not with the jerky motion of a faulty trackpad, but with a smooth, deliberate glide. It drifted from the center of the screen towards the top right corner. My hands were flat on the desk, nowhere near the laptop. I watched, frozen, as the cursor hovered, then settled over a single folder. A new folder, one I had never made. It clicked. The folder opened. The name of the folder was "Don't Tape It Again." A sound escaped my throat, a strangled gasp. This was a message, a direct response. It knew. It was watching me, right now, through the peeled-back tape of the webcam. The air in the room became thick, heavy. Every shadow seemed to deepen. The walls were closing in. I felt a raw, primal urge to slam the laptop shut, to run, to get out. But I couldn't move. My body was locked in place, a spectator to my own horror. Inside the folder was a grid of video files, dozens of them. They were all named with a string of numbers. Timestamps, dates and times from the last few weeks. Backquote 20231026, 0314 a.m. Backquote 202310270122 a.m. Backquote. The cursor, that same impossibly smooth agent, moved again. It slid down the list and stopped on the most recent file. The timestamp was from last night. It double-clicked. A video player opened, filling the screen. The image was grainy, washed out in the strange gray light of a monitor in a dark room. It was the view from my webcam, and I was in it. I was seeing myself from hours ago, slumped forward at this very desk, my head resting on my arms, fast asleep. I must have dozed off here before stumbling to the couch. My chest rose and fell with each deep breath. Vulnerable. Unconscious. I watched myself sleep for 3 seconds. 4. 5. It was the most terrifying footage I had ever seen. Then, behind me, in the darkness of the apartment, something moved. It was a patch of deeper black against the gloom. It shifted, detached itself from the shadows by the hallway. My heart slammed against my ribs, a painful, frantic drumming. The shape resolved. It was a person. Tall, slender, long, dark hair fell over its shoulders, obscuring its features. It took a slow, silent step forward, then another. It moved with a nightmarish grace, not making a sound. It stopped just behind my sleeping form. For a terrifying eternity, it just stood there, a dark statue looming over me. Then it began to lean. Slowly, so slowly, it bent forward, its long hair spilling like black water. A face emerged from the shadows, tilting into the very edge of the webcam's frame. It was a woman's face. Pale. So incredibly pale, like it had never seen the sun. Her eyes were wide, dark pits. And they were not looking at my sleeping body, they were staring directly into the camera lens. At me. A scream tore itself from my lungs, a raw, animal sound of pure terror. I threw myself backwards, away from the desk. The chair tipped, spinning out from under me, and I crashed to the floor in a heap of tangled limbs and metal. The impact sent a jolt of pain up my spine, but I barely felt it. My eyes were still fixed on the glowing screen of the laptop. Scrambling on my hands and knees, my breath coming in ragged, sobbing gasps, I looked back at the screen. The video was still playing. The pale face was still there, its eyes locked with mine through the barrier of time and technology. Then, on the screen, the face did something new. It slowly, languidly turned its head. Its gaze shifted from the camera lens to the back of my own sleeping head in the video. It stared at me for a moment, an unreadable expression on its features, and then it raised a single, pale finger to its lips. Shh! As the woman on the screen made the hushing gesture, the little white cursor on my screen moved one last time. It slid smoothly over to the corner of the video player, rested on the red X button, and clicked. The video vanished. The screen returned to the desktop image. The empty room, the vacant chair, waiting. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. The word itself was a joke. Sleep was something other people did, in other houses, in other lives. My life was this, the harsh glare of every light bulb in my apartment burning at once, a wooden baseball bat slick with sweat in my palms, and my back pressed into the corner of the couch. The cushions dug into my spine. I didn't care. Every shadow was a threat. Every creak of the old building was a footstep. The laptop screen was still on, across the room on my desk. I'd left it. A beacon. A dare. The wallpaper it had chosen stared back at me. My own empty room, the desk chair pulled out. Waiting. It was a violation that kept twisting the knife. A hacker. I said the word aloud, a dry whisper in the bright, silent room. Hacker. It had to be. A person. A flesh-and-blood person somewhere far away, behind another screen. Some basement-dwelling creep with skills I couldn't comprehend. They got my password, they got into my network, they were fucking with me. They used old photos, old playlists, to build a ghost. But it wasn't a ghost. It was just code. Malicious code. The video, that was just a deepfake. A clever trick. They took a feed from my webcam and superimposed an image. That's all. It had to be. The alternative was unthinkable. The alternative was a shape in the dark. A pale face, a person standing over me while I slept. No, I wouldn't let my mind go there. My plan was simple. Stupid? Maybe. But it was a plan. It was a lifeline. When the sun came up, I would go to a coffee shop. Not mine, a new one. I would use their Wi-Fi. I'd reset everything. Every password. Spotify, email, social media, bank accounts. I'd buy a new router on the way home. I'd wipe my laptop, my phone. A digital apocalypse. A scorched earth policy. I would burn my online life to the ground and build a new one from the ashes. One with two-factor authentication on everything. I rehearsed the steps in my head, over and over. A mantra against the fear. The hours crawled by. The artificial daylight of the lamps fought against the real darkness outside the windows. I watched the black squares of glass, expecting a face to appear. Nothing did. I listened for the lock on my door to turn. It didn't. Finally, a weak, gray light began to seep into the room. Morning. It didn't feel like a relief. It just felt like a different kind of quiet. The fear didn't vanish. It just changed shape. It was less immediate, but heavier. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and a sour taste in my mouth. My hands ached from gripping the bat. I needed water. My throat felt like sandpaper. Slowly, I uncurled my body from the couch. My joints screamed in protest. I put the bat down on the coffee table, my handprint a dark stain on the wood. I stood up, limbs stiff, and shuffled toward the kitchen. The floor was cold under my bare feet. My routine, before the world went sideways, was simple. Come home, drop my wallet and phone in the bowl on the counter, hang my keys on the hook by the door. I did it without thinking. Muscle memory. I distinctly remembered the jingle of the keys as I hung them up yesterday. A small, final sound before I'd walked into the living room and my night had unraveled. But my keys weren't on the hook. I stopped in the doorway between the living room and the small dining area. I stared. There, in the dead center of the dark wood of my dining table, sat my keys. A small, metallic island on a sea of empty space. My brain tried to work. Did I leave them there? No. Never. I never leave them on the table. The hook is the spot. The hook has been the spot for the 5 years I've lived in this apartment. The routine is the only thing that keeps the chaos of my life in check. I walked closer, my bare feet silent on the floorboards. I reached out, my fingers hesitating, just above the cold metal. Something was wrong. More wrong than just the placement. There was something wrapped around the key ring. I leaned in. A hair. A single long strand of black hair, looped and tangled in the metal. It was fine, almost like silk. My hair is short. And brown. This was not my hair. I picked up the keys. They felt cold. And slightly damp. A faint, sticky residue clung to them, and to my fingertips. My stomach churned. I held the key ring up to the gray morning light. The black hair glistened. It was a signature, a calling card, proof. The hacker wasn't in a basement across the country. The hacker had a key. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, where I'd left it. The sound was so sudden, so violent in the silence, that I flinched, nearly dropping the keys. It buzzed again. A text message. My heart started to pound a sick, heavy rhythm against my ribs, a rhythm I remembered from last night. I walked to the counter as if wading through water. I looked at the screen. Unknown number. The message was one line. 5 words that stole the air from my lungs. You dropped this last night. The world tilted. The 4 walls of my apartment pressed in. They were here, in my home, while I slept. While I sat on the couch with a stupid baseball bat. They walked past me. They saw my keys on the floor. They picked them up. They put a hair on them. They placed them on the table for me to find. A gift. A warning. A rage, white-hot and pure, surged through me, burning away the fear. It was a raw, animal fury. I wasn't a victim in a game anymore. I was an animal in a cage, and something was poking me with a stick. WHO, are you? The shout tore from my throat, raw and loud in the small space. Get the hell out of my house! Show yourself, you coward! My voice echoed back at me. Silence. Nothing. Come on! I screamed, turning in a slow circle, my eyes darting into every corner. What do you want? Slam! The sound was sharp, explosive. It came from the bedroom. The sound of a door being thrown shut. A closet door. My closet door. My blood went cold. The rage vanished, replaced by a spike of pure, unadulterated terror. It was an answer. It was an invitation. I ran, my feet hammered against the floorboards, down the short hallway. I didn't think. I just moved. I burst into the bedroom, my eyes immediately locking onto the closet. The louvered white doors were closed tight. I lunged forward, grabbed the small wooden knobs, and ripped the doors open. They flew back on their hinges, banging against the wall. I stared inside. My clothes hung there. Shirts on the left, pants on the right, just like I left them. The space was small, cramped. I could see the back wall. It was empty. There was no one there. A shaky breath escaped me. A trick. Just a sound. The old building, the wind. No. My eyes scanned the rows of clothes again. My button-down shirts, a sad collection of blues and grays, another blue one, a striped one, and then white. Hanging right in the middle of my shirts, as if it had always been there, was a dress. It was a simple, old-fashioned white dress, sleeveless, with a high collar. The fabric was thin, almost translucent, and it had a yellowed, aged tint to it, especially around the seams. It looked like something from another time. It was the kind of thing you'd find in a dusty trunk in an attic. It was utterly, completely alien. It smelled faintly of lavender and dust. The woman from the video. The pale face. The long, dark hair. This was her dress. It was in my closet, mingling with my things, an impossible contamination. A guttural sound of revulsion came out of me. I reached in, my fingers recoiling at first from the strange, cool fabric. I didn't want to touch it, but I had to get it out. I grabbed a handful of the white material, ripped the thin wooden hanger from the rail, and threw the dress onto the floor. It landed in a heap, a pale stain on the dark wood. The moment the dress hit the floor, it happened. Click. Every light in the apartment went out. Not a flicker, not a fuse blowing, a single, decisive click, and the world was gone. The bright morning, the lamps, the laptop screen, all extinguished at once. I was plunged into a darkness so complete it was physical. It pressed against my eyes. It filled my lungs. Silence. I stood frozen in the center of my bedroom in the suffocating blackness. I couldn't see my own hands. I couldn't see the walls. I held my breath, straining my ears, listening past the frantic drumming of my own heart. And then I heard it. It came from the corner of the room, the corner to my left, by the window. A whisper. It was a woman's voice. Soft. Raspy. And it was close. So close. Don't. A pause. I felt the air shift. Touch. Another pause, filled with the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. My things. My body moved before my brain did. A single, primal command screamed through my veins. Get out! I scrambled backwards, my hands slapping against the floorboards, kicking the white dress away from me. The whisper hung in the dark, a foul stain in the air. My things. I didn't see. I didn't need to. I knew the layout of my own bedroom. I lurched to my feet, shoulder-checked the doorframe, and half fell, half ran down the short hallway. The living room was a void, a black hole that had swallowed all the light, all the safety I had imagined. My hands found the front door. The metal of the knob was cold. The deadbolt was a small, stiff lever under my thumb. It turned. The door swung open. I didn't look back. I spilled out into the building's hallway, the institutional yellow light, a sickening, beautiful relief. I slammed the door shut behind me, the sound echoing in the narrow corridor. I leaned against the opposite wall, sliding down its cool, painted surface, until I was sitting on the industrial-grade carpet. My lungs burned. I gasped for air, each breath a ragged, wet sound. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner trying to beat its way out. I was out. I was in the hall. Safe. The word was a joke. I was in a dingy hallway, on a floor with 7 other doors, 7 other lives that were not mine. I was a few feet away from whatever was in my apartment. The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through me. I fumbled for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get it out of my pocket. The screen lit up. My thumb hovered, twitching, over the 911 icon. What would I say? There's a voice in my apartment? An address? They'll think I'm crazy. They'll send a wellness check, not a SWAT team. No, I couldn't call the cops. Not yet. I needed someone to see it. I needed a witness. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. Dave? My thumb jabbed at his contact photo. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Each ring was an eternity. Alex, what's up, man? It's like 7 in the morning. His voice was thick with sleep. Dave, I need you to come over. Now. My own voice was a stranger's, thin and cracked. What? What's wrong? You sound awful. I had to lie. The truth was too much. The truth would get me a go back to sleep, dude, and a click. The power, I said, the lie forming as I spoke it. My power. It's out. All of it. I think I blew the main breaker or something. The panel is freaking me out, man. It's making a weird buzzing sound. I don't want to touch it. A pause. I could hear him shifting in bed. The main? For the whole apartment? Yeah, dead. Everything went black. I heard a loud click and then nothing. Can you just come take a look? Please. I know it's early. Yeah, all right. Don't touch anything, he said, his voice now more awake, more concerned. I'll be there in 20. Just stay out of the apartment if you're worried. I am, I whispered. Thanks, man. Seriously. I hung up. 20 minutes. I sat on the floor of the hallway, my knees pulled to my chest, my eyes locked on the plain, featureless wood of my front door. Waiting, every creak of the building, every distant elevator hum, was it. Coming for me. But the door stayed shut. The knob didn't turn. The 20 minutes felt like 20 years. When I finally saw Dave's familiar, lanky form turn the corner at the end of the hall, a wave of relief so powerful, it almost made me dizzy washed over me. He was real. He was solid. He wasn't a whisper in the dark. Hey, you look like hell, he said, his eyes scanning me up and down. Feel like it, I muttered, pushing myself to my feet. My legs were stiff. All right, let's see this thing. He reached for the doorknob. As his hand touched the metal, the light under the door flickered on. I could see it through the crack at the bottom. A soft, warm glow. My blood ran cold again. Wait, but he'd already turned the knob and pushed the door open. He stepped inside, flipping the main light switch by the door. The living room flooded with light. The lamps were on. The TV screen was black. The laptop on my desk was glowing with its screensaver. My empty room staring back at us. Everything was exactly as it should be. Everything was normal. Dave turned to me, an eyebrow raised. Power seems fine, Alex. I pushed past him, my heart sinking into my stomach. No, it was out. Everything was out. It was pitch black. I stalked through the apartment. Kitchen lights on. Bathroom light on. I ran down the hall to the bedroom. I flicked the switch. The overhead light came on instantly. I stared at the spot on the floor where I had thrown the dress. The floor was bare. The dark wood was clean. There was nothing there. I spun around, my eyes wild, scanning every corner. I looked at the closet. The louvered doors were slightly ajar, just as I'd left them after I'd ripped them open. I stumbled towards it, my hands shaking again, and pulled the doors wide. My shirts hung there, my sad collection of blues and grays, my pants. No gaps, no empty hangers, no white dress. It was gone. It was just gone. Alex, what's going on? Dave's voice came from the doorway. He sounded worried now, worried about me. I turned to face him, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. It's gone. The dress. It was right there. It was right here. I pointed at the floor, then at the closet rail. A white dress. It wasn't mine. It was hanging in my closet. Dave's face was a mask of confusion and concern. A dress? What are you talking about? You called me about the power. The power went out when I found it, when I touched it. Don't you see? It's playing with me. Who's it? He asked, his voice low and careful, the way you talk to a spooked animal. I couldn't answer. I just stared at him, my chest heaving. I sounded insane. I knew how I sounded. Look, man, Dave said, walking slowly into the room. You've been burning the candle at both ends. You look exhausted. Maybe you were dreaming? A waking nightmare or something? It wasn't a dream, Dave. It was real. The keys on the table, the hair, the whisper. He took another step closer. Okay. Let's check the breaker, just like you said, one thing at a time. He was humoring me, treating me like a patient. We walked back to the small alcove by the front door where the circuit breaker panel was. He unlatched the small metal door. Inside, the switches were all in a neat row, all in the on position. See, nothing's flipped, he said gently. Sometimes in these old buildings you get power fluctuations, a brownout. It could have just been a flicker. It wasn't a flicker, it was a click. A loud click. And a voice. I knew I sounded desperate. I felt a profound sense of despair. He didn't believe me. Why would he? There was no proof. The monster had cleaned up after itself. Okay, well, I'm here now. The lights are on. No weird buzzing, he said, closing the panel door. He put a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm. Grounding. Maybe you should try and get some sleep, man. I can stick around for a bit if you want. The offer was kind, but it was laced with pity. He thought I was cracking up. The frustration was a physical thing, a hot pressure behind my eyes. I was alone in this. Truly alone. No, I'm okay, I lied, pulling away from his hand. Thanks for coming. Sorry for dragging you out of bed. Don't worry about it. That's what friends are for, he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. But seriously, get some rest. You look like you've seen a ghost. I flinched at the word. Yeah. Maybe? He walked toward the door, grabbing his jacket from the back of a chair. Call me later, okay? Let me know you're all right. I will. He paused at the open door, turning back to me. He patted my shoulder again, a gesture of finality. Take it easy, man. And, hey, he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. What happened to your back? My mind went blank. My back? What about it? You've got... Dude, turn around. I turned, my back to him, a new, cold dread coiling in my gut. What now? I heard him suck in a breath. Holy shit, Alex! Did you fall? No. What is it? I twisted my neck, trying to see. Take your shirt off! The command was so blunt, so serious, that I obeyed without thinking. I pulled my t-shirt over my head, goosebumps rising on my skin in the cool air of the apartment. I stood there, bare-chested, facing the wall. Give me your phone, he said. His voice was different now. The pity was gone, replaced by something else. Shock. I handed him the phone. I heard the shutter click. He handed it back to me. I looked at the screen, and the world fell away. There, on the screen, was a picture of my own back. And scored into the skin, from my left shoulder blade down towards my right hip, were 3 long, parallel gashes. They were deep red, angry, the skin around them raised and puffy. They weren't scrapes, they weren't scratches from a fall, they were perfectly spaced, perfectly aligned. The kind of marks a hand would make. The kind of marks left by long, sharp fingernails, raking across flesh in the dark. I remembered the moment the lights went out. The moment I stood frozen in the blackness of my bedroom. I hadn't felt a thing. Dave, I whispered, my voice trembling. That happened in here. He was staring at me, his face pale. The skepticism was gone, burned away and replaced with a dawning horror. He believed me. He finally believed me. Jesus Christ, he breathed. Alex, who did this to you? I don't know, I said, the image on the screen searing itself into my brain. It was in the room with me, in the dark. Dave's eyes darted around the apartment, no longer seeing a normal living space, but a cage, a crime scene. We're calling the police, right now. And you are getting the hell out of here. You can stay with me. We're leaving now. He was already moving, grabbing my arm, pulling me toward the doorway. Hope, real and sharp, pierced through the fear. Getting out. Leaving this place. He reached the front door, which was still open from when he'd come in. As his hand reached for the edge to pull it closed behind us, it moved on its own. Slam! The door flew out of his grasp, slamming shut with the force of a car crash. The sound was a physical blow. We both stumbled back, hands flying up to our ears. In the ringing silence that followed, we heard another sound, a sound that sealed our fate. Click-clack, the mechanical, final sound of the deadbolt sliding into place. From the inside. We were frozen for a second, 2 statues in a suddenly silent tomb. Then the panic hit. Dave lunged for the door first, grabbing the knob and twisting it violently. It didn't budge. It's locked! It's locked! He yelled, his voice cracking with disbelief. I threw myself against the door, my shoulders screaming in protest. "Let us out!" I roared, hammering on the wood with my fists. "Open the damn door!" Dave was pulling on the handle with all his weight, his feet scraping against the floor for purchase. "It's stuck! Something's jamming it!" We were trapped. The realization hit me with the force of a physical impact. The brightly lit apartment was a cage. The lights weren't for safety. They were to let us see the bars. Then, we both fell silent at the same time. A new sound. A tiny sound. A soft, scraping noise from the bottom of the door. We both stared down. In the narrow crack between the door and the floor, something was appearing. A tiny white rectangle, being pushed slowly, deliberately, into our prison. A piece of folded paper. It stopped in the middle of the threshold. A silent offering. My heart was a cold, dead weight in my chest. I knelt down, my hand shaking so hard I could barely control it. My fingers brushed against the paper. It felt dry. Normal. I picked it up. I unfolded it. 2 words, written in a messy, looping scrawl. Like a child trying to learn their letters. The writing was thick, the pencil pressed hard into the paper. It was a simple message. A plea. A command. An owner's instruction to a pet. Don't go. The piece of paper was light in my hand. Too light for the weight of the words on it. Don't go. Not a threat. A request. An order. Dave stared at it, his mouth hanging open. The confident, rational friend who had come to check on my faulty wiring was gone. In his place was just another trapped animal. "What the fuck?" he whispered. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. The final nail in the coffin of normalcy. My first coherent thought was a single primal word. Phone. "Call the cops," I said, my voice a dry rasp. "Call them. Tell them we're trapped. Someone's in here with us." Dave didn't need to be told twice. He fumbled his phone out of his jeans, his fingers clumsy. He almost dropped it. His thumb smeared across the screen, jabbing at the green call icon. He put it to his ear. I watched his face, searching it for any sign of hope, of a connection to the outside world. His eyes were wide, fixed on the locked door in front of us. I couldn't stand still. I started pacing. The 3 steps from the door to the edge of the living room rug. Turn. 3 steps back. My eyes darted everywhere. Into the dark mouth of the hallway leading to my bedroom. At the kitchen, with its gleaming, silent appliances. At the windows, black mirrors reflecting our own panicked faces against the city lights outside. The apartment felt charged, electric, like the air before a lightning strike. It was watching us. I could feel its gaze on the back of my neck, cold and heavy. Come on, pick up," Dave muttered into the phone. He took it away from his ear, looked at the screen. No signal. What do you mean, no signal? I had full bars a minute ago. He tried again, and again. Nothing. Just the no-service message mocking him from the top of the screen. "Use yours," he said, his voice rising in pitch. I grabbed my phone from my back pocket. I didn't have to look. I knew what it would say. No service. The small icon was grayed out. A tombstone. The trap wasn't just physical. It was total. It had cut us off. Dave's breathing was getting loud, ragged. Okay. Wi-Fi. We can use the Wi-Fi. A video call, an email, something. He was already tapping at his screen, pulling up his settings. I watched him. A sliver of hope cutting through the dread. Of course. The Wi-Fi? It couldn't control the Wi-Fi. Connected, he said, a note of triumph in his voice. He opened an app, his fingers flying. I'm calling Sarah. He put the phone back to his ear. I leaned in, trying to hear, listening for the digital ringtone that would mean we weren't alone. I heard nothing. Dave's face tightened. What is it? I asked. It's just static, he said, pulling the phone away. He hit the speaker button. A harsh, grating hiss filled the room. The sound of a dead channel. White noise. It was a sound full of nothing. Dave stared at the phone, then at me. His brief moment of an inventive solution was dissolving into raw fear. He was about to hang up, to try something else, when the sound changed. The static didn't just stop, it was cut off. Abruptly. In the dead air that followed, a new sound began. A single piano key, then another, and another. A slow, mournful melody. My blood turned to ice. I knew that song. I knew it intimately. It was the first track on a playlist I had made years ago. A playlist I had named For Rainy Nights. A playlist I listened to when I couldn't sleep. A playlist I had listened to just 2 nights ago. The music wasn't coming from the phone speakers in a tinny, digital way. It sounded like it was being played right here in the room with us. Each note was clear, full, resonating in the space around us, as if a grand piano was sitting right in the middle of my living room. Dave looked at me, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. "Alex, what is that? That's your sad bastard music." He hung up the call. The music stopped instantly. The silence that rushed back in was worse than the sound had been. It was proof. This thing hadn't just jammed the signal, it had answered the phone. And then another sound ripped through the quiet. R-R-R-R-R-I-I-I-N-N-N-G-G-G. It was so loud, so sudden, we both yelled out. I stumbled back, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The sound was an old, familiar, piercing shriek, a sound I hadn't heard in years. It was the landline. The old beige phone sat on a small end table by the couch, an ancient relic I'd never bothered to throw away. The cord connecting it to the wall jack had been chewed through by a mouse, or had just crumbled from age months ago. I knew for a fact it was disconnected. It was a dead object, a piece of plastic. R-R-R-R-I-I-I-I-N-N-N-G-G-G. It screamed again, a bell from a forgotten decade. It was wrong. Every law of physics, of reason, screamed that this could not be happening. "Don't answer it," Dave hissed, grabbing my arm. His fingers dug into my bicep like a vice. R-R-R-R-I-I-I-N-N-N-G-G-G. It was faster now, more frantic, more demanding. It wasn't a call, it was a siren, a warning. It felt like it was drilling directly into my skull. I covered my ears, but the sound was inside my head. Ring, 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 ring! A frantic, insane volley of sound. Then, as abruptly as it began, it stopped. The silence left our ears ringing. We stood frozen, waiting. Click. A small, mechanical click from the phone. A familiar, automated female voice, the kind you hear on customer service lines, echoed crisply from the phone's tiny speaker. "You have 1 new voice message." My legs gave out. I sagged against the wall, sliding down to the floor. This wasn't happening. This was a dream. A nightmare. Dave just stood there, a statue carved from fear, his eyes locked on the beige plastic phone, as if it were a coiled snake. The green light on the base of the phone blinked. A single, evil green eye. Blinking, blinking, blinking. "It's toying with us," I whispered from the floor. "It's showing us it can do whatever it wants. We have to hear it," Dave said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He was past panic. He was in a state of shock. "We have to know." He took a slow step towards the phone, then another. He looked like a soldier walking through a minefield. He reached out a trembling hand and pressed the play button. The speaker crackled to life. For a second there was only a soft hiss. Then a voice, a whisper, a woman's voice, but not the same one I'd heard in my bedroom. This one was ragged, desperate, broken words separated by labored, wet-sounding breaths. "It doesn't want." A long, shuddering gasp. "Doesn't want you to go." Another pause. I could hear something else in the background. A low hum. A faint scraping sound. "It's coming for." The message cut off. The automated voice clicked back on. "End of messages." The green light stopped blinking. "What was that?" Dave breathed. "Who was that?" Before I could answer, a sound came from the kitchen, a soft, metallic chink. We both spun to face the kitchen entryway. It was dark in there. the only light spilling in from the living room. Another sound. Chink! Chink! It was the sound of silverware, the sound of a fork tine tapping against a knife blade. I got to my feet, my body acting on pure instinct. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a thick glass ashtray from the coffee table. Dave backed away from the kitchen, his eyes wide. "Alex," he said, his voice barely a whisper. A scraping sound. Loud now, the sound of metal dragging across my granite countertop. I saw a flicker of movement in the darkness, a flash of silver, and then it happened. The entire block of knives on the counter rattled. The wooden block lifted a half-inch off the counter and slammed back down. And then, one by one, the knives pulled themselves from their slots. The paring knife, the santoku, the long, serrated bread knife, the cleaver. They rose up out of the block, an obscene bouquet of polished steel, and hung there in the air, points down, turning slowly in the gloom. They were followed by every piece of metal in the dish drainer, forks, spoons, butter knives. They lifted into the air, a cloud of glittering, deadly metal, hovering silently in the kitchen doorway. My mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. It was impossible. It was a movie trick. Then they all turned, a single swarm, and aimed directly at us. For a heartbeat, there was perfect silence. Then the air screamed. The entire cloud of metal shot forward, a storm of silver and steel. It wasn't a random spray. It was a volley. 100 tiny missiles, flying straight for our heads. "Get down!" I screamed, shoving Dave with all my might. We fell backwards over the couch, a tangle of limbs. The air above us filled with a high-pitched thwip, thwip, thwip as the silverware peppered the wall where we had just been standing. A deeper, more solid thunk-thunk followed as the heavier knives slammed into the plaster, burying themselves inches deep. We scrambled on the floor, crawling on our hands and knees like animals, desperate to get away. The bedroom. It was the only other room with a door. I lunged for the hallway, Dave right behind me. We crashed into the bedroom, and I slammed the hollow core door shut, twisting the cheap lock on the knob. It felt as flimsy as cardboard. We collapsed against the door, listening. For a moment there was a cascade of soft clinks and clatters as the remaining forks and spoons that hadn't hit the wall fell to the hardwood floor outside. Then, silence. A heavy, listening silence. We stayed there for what felt like an hour, pressed against the door, our breathing harsh and loud in the small room. My back screamed from where the scratches were. Every muscle in my body trembled. We were alive. We were in one piece. Finally, Dave spoke, his voice a choked whisper. "Jesus Christ! Holy Christ, Alex!" I couldn't form words. I just nodded, my head pressed against the cool wood of the door. He pushed himself away from the door, stumbling towards my bed. He sat down heavily on the edge of the mattress. I stayed where I was, guardian of a door that couldn't protect us from anything. I watched him. He was just staring at the floor, his hands gripping his knees. He looked broken. The horror was complete. He was in it now, as deep as I was. He looked up slowly, his gaze drifting across the room. He saw my phone, lying face up on the nightstand where I'd left it that morning. His eyes narrowed. He looked at it for a long moment. The silence stretched. "Alex," he said. His voice was different. The fear was still there, but it was edged with something else now. Something cold. Confusion. Suspicion. He pointed a shaking finger at the nightstand. "Your phone." I looked over. The screen was on. Its soft blue light was the only illumination in the room besides the ambient city glow from the window. I didn't understand what he was getting at. "What about it?" "It's on," he said, standing up and taking a hesitant step towards it. "The screen." He picked it up. He held it out for me to see. The screen was lit not with the home screen or the no service message, but with the active call display. A call was in progress. The timer was running. 1:32, 1:33. It was a call a minute and a half in progress, a call that had been connected while we were being attacked. A call made from my phone. And at the top of the screen, under the words "calling," was the contact name. A single, simple word I hadn't put in my phone. A name I hadn't used in 15 years. Mama. My brain couldn't catch up. The phone clattered from Dave's numb fingers, hitting the floor with a dead plastic thud. The screen stayed lit. Mama. The timer kept running. 1:48, 1:49. An ongoing call to a ghost. The door. Dave finally choked out, his voice raw. He wasn't looking at the phone anymore. He was looking at the thin bedroom door, the only thing between us and everything else. The wardrobe. Help me. Action. I needed action. Thinking was a trap. The call was a trap. The memories it kicked up were a trap. My feet unstuck from the floor. I grabbed one side of my heavy oak-finish wardrobe. Dave took the other. It was heavy, full of clothes I'd never wear again. We grunted, heaving it, the legs scratching 2 deep gouges into the wood floor. We jammed it against the door, wedging it under the knob. It wasn't a barricade. It was a joke, a prayer made of particle board and cheap veneer. I leaned against the wall, chest heaving. My mind was a screaming engine, running on fumes, stuck on one word. Why? Why my mother? Why that music? Why show us it could control everything, then make a fake call to a dead woman? It wasn't just trying to scare us. It was digging. It was pulling out things buried deep inside me and dangling them in front of my face. It wasn't a random monster. It knew me. That thought was colder than the knife storm. Dave was staring at the wardrobe, then back at me. It wants to play, he whispered, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. It's playing with us. It's not playing with you, Dave, I said, the words tasting like ash. It's playing with me. You just got caught in the splash zone. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders. He was here because of me. He was going to die here because of me. Then we heard it. My head snapped up. Dave froze, his hand still on the wardrobe. Every sound from the last hour had been sharp, electronic, violent. This was different. This was quiet, organic. Slap. A soft, wet sound from the living room. Like a bare foot stepping in a puddle. We held our breath. The silence stretched. My own heartbeat was a deafening drum in my ears. I strained to listen, to parse the noise. Slap drag. Another one. Slower this time. A heavy, wet footstep, followed by the sound of that same foot being dragged across the hardwood floor. It was a shambling, uneven rhythm. The sound of something broken. Something hurt. Slap drag. It was coming closer. Down the short hallway. Toward our door. Toward our flimsy wardrobe barricade. Dave's eyes were wide, locked on mine. He mouthed a single word. What? I could only shake my head. I didn't know. I didn't want to know. My hand found a lamp on my nightstand, the base heavy and ceramic. I gripped it tight, my knuckles white. The wet, dragging footsteps stopped, right outside the door. The silence that followed was the worst part. It was a listening silence. It knew we were in here. It knew we were holding our breath. We were 2 mice huddled behind a wall of cardboard, and the cat was just on the other side, waiting for the fun to start. I could picture it out there, a dripping shape in the dark. My eyes were glued to the brass doorknob, visible in the gap between the wardrobe and the doorframe, waiting for it to turn. And then it did. It turned slowly at first, a metallic groan echoing in the room. Then it stopped. A second passed. Then it twisted back and forth, hard. Jiggle, 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 rattle, bang. The whole door shook as something slammed against it from the other side. Dave and I both jumped, a strangled cry escaping my throat. Bang! Bang! It wasn't trying to break the lock. It was just hitting the door. A slow, rhythmic pounding. Then, the voice came. It wasn't a whisper this time. It wasn't through a speaker. It was right there, on the other side of the wood, muffled but clear. The same desperate, broken woman's voice from the answering machine. Look! The voice was a ragged shriek, full of a pain so profound it made the hairs on my arms stand up. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea. Please! It cried out, the voice cracking. You have to look! The pounding stopped. The doorknob stopped rattling. The wet footsteps started again, but they weren't coming closer. They were moving away, back toward the living room. Slap drag, until they faded into nothing. What the hell was that? Dave breathed, his voice trembling. It's telling us to look? Look at what? He gestured wildly around the barricaded room. We can't see anything! I didn't answer. My mind was racing. Look. The voice on the phone said, It's coming for... The voice at the door said, Look. It was a warning. It had been a warning all along. The note. Don't go. The garbled message. The plea at the door. It wasn't the primary threat. It was the alarm system. A new sound started. A soft, low creak. It wasn't from the door. I turned my head slowly. Dave heard it too. His face went pale. The sound was coming from behind him. From the wardrobe. Our barricade. Creak. It was the unmistakable sound of a hinge. A hinge moving. We stared, mouths open, at the left-hand door of the wardrobe we had just dragged across the room. It was opening. Not from being pushed in. Not from the outside. It was swinging out. From the inside. Slowly, silently, the heavy door swung open, revealing not the compressed darkness of my hanging clothes, but a solid patch of perfect black. It was a blackness that drank the light from the room. A hole cut into reality itself. Dave scrambled away from it, falling backwards onto the bed, crab walking away until his back hit the wall. We were trapped between the thing at the door and now. This new impossibility. From the absolute blackness inside my wardrobe, a hand emerged. It was bone white, long and thin, the fingers skeletal. There was no arm attached, just a hand and wrist, floating in the void. It wasn't aggressive. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace. It drifted out of the darkness, and it did one thing. It pointed. It wasn't pointing at me. It wasn't pointing at Dave. It was pointing a single, trembling, white finger towards the window. My blood ran cold. The voice. Look. The hand. Pointing. It was all the same message. My gaze followed the direction of that impossible finger. To the large picture window that overlooked the street 6 stories down. The glass was dark, reflecting the chaos of my room, the wide eyes of 2 terrified men, the pale hand hanging in the air. I had to see. It was a compulsion, a command I couldn't disobey. I dropped the lamp. I got on my hands and knees. I didn't want to stand. I felt safer on the ground. I crawled past the bed where Dave sat paralyzed, his jaw slack. I crawled towards the window, the rough carpet scraping my palms. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Every instinct screamed at me to close my eyes, to curl into a ball, to hide, but the pointing finger held me captive. I reached the window. I pushed myself up just enough to see over the sill. At first, I saw nothing, just the familiar brick facade of the apartment building across the street. A few windows were lit. A man watching TV, a woman reading a book. Normal life, 1,000,000 miles away. And then I saw it. I saw what the hand wanted me to see. It wasn't on my building, it was on the building opposite. It was a shadow. But it wasn't cast by anything. It was a living piece of night, clinging to the brickwork about 3 floors down. It was huge, bigger than a car, its shape vaguely human but hideously wrong. The limbs were too long, jointed in too many places. It had no features, just a solid, light-devouring mass. It moved, not climbing like a person, or crawling like an insect. It flowed, pouring itself upwards over the brick and mortar, silent and relentless. As I watched, one of its long, thin shadow limbs stretched out, touched a windowsill 2 feet above it, and the rest of the body pulled itself up with an unnatural fluidity. It was coming up. It was moving from that building to this one, and it was heading directly for my apartment. I stared, my mind short-circuiting. The knives, the phone calls, the voice, all of it. It was a fire alarm, a desperate, screaming, terrifying fire alarm trying to get my attention. And the fire was that thing, that huge, silent, climbing darkness. Behind me, I heard a soft click. I ripped my eyes away from the window, turning back to the room. The wardrobe door was closed. The pale hand was gone. My knees hit the floor. The carpet scraped my skin, but I didn't feel it. I felt nothing but the image burned onto the back of my eyelids. The shadow, the climbing, flowing, wrongness of it. It wasn't just coming for the building, it was coming for this window. For this room. For me. The soft click from behind me was the sound of a closing tomb. I scrambled backwards on all fours, a crab in a boiling pot, kicking myself away from the window. My head whipped around. The wardrobe door was shut. The black void was gone. The skeletal hand was gone. It was just a cheap piece of furniture again, jammed against the bedroom door. A useless, stupid barricade. Dave was a wreck. He was still pressed against the far wall, his face the color of old paper. His breath came in shallow, bird-like pants. "What was that?" he managed, the words broken. "Alex, what the hell was that?" "A warning," I said. The word felt dry and brittle in my mouth. My brain was finally catching up, connecting the dots in a pattern that made me sick. The knives weren't an attack. The phone call wasn't a threat. The woman's voice at the door. "Look! The hand! Pointing! Look! A warning about that?" Dave's voice cracked, pointing a shaking hand at the window. "That thing climbing the damn wall? What is it?" "I don't know." The guilt I'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by a different kind of dread. It wasn't my fault Dave was here. We were both just in the wrong place at the wrong time. This apartment. This goddamn apartment. But whatever's been happening in here, it isn't the thing we need to be scared of. It's trying to help us. The thought made no sense. Ghosts don't help. Monsters don't send warnings. But the hand had been precise, deliberate. It wasn't angry. It was desperate. Silence fell. The only sound was our ragged breathing. The city outside was a distant hum. We were in a bubble of terror, waiting for the climbing shadow to reach the window, waiting for the glass to break. I scanned the room for a better weapon than a lamp. A book? A belt. It was useless. We were fish in a barrel. Then a new sound. A soft, electronic chime. We both flinched. Our heads snapped towards my desk. My laptop. I'd left it closed. The lid was lifting. It rose slowly, smoothly, with no hand touching it. It opened to a perfect 90-degree angle and stopped. The screen glowed, illuminating a corner of the dark room. We stared, frozen. This wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was quiet and impossible, and somehow that was worse. The cursor, a small white arrow, materialized in the center of the screen. It quivered for a second, then slid purposefully towards the web browser icon. It double-clicked. The browser window opened. The cursor moved to the search bar, and then it began to type. There was no sound of keys being pressed. The letters just appeared, one by one, in the empty white box. A ghostly intelligence was spelling out our doom. COGAIMATTICHCHUNGCUZ. The cursor moved. It clicked the search button. The screen filled with links. News articles. Forum posts. Missing person reports. A face stared out at us from the top result. A young woman, maybe 22, with a kind smile and dark eyes. The headline below her picture read, "University student vanishes from Z Tower apartments. 1 year later, still no clues." Her name was Mai. "Oh my God," Dave breathed. "Alex, she lived here. Before you. I remember the realtor mentioning the last tenant left in a hurry." I couldn't speak. I just read. "My fam. A music student. Lived alone. Last seen entering her apartment. This apartment. On a Tuesday night. Never seen again. No signs of forced entry. No signs of a struggle. Her wallet, her phone, her keys, all left behind. She just ceased to exist. In this room." The cursor moved again. It clicked on a link that led to a raw video file repository. An old security camera feed. The timestamp in the corner read a year ago. The angle was from a camera in the building's hallway, pointed at my front door. The video played. We saw the girl, Mai, walking down the hall. She looked tired. She fumbled with her keys, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The door closed. The timestamp in the corner began to speed up. Hours bled into seconds. Day turned to night, then back to day. The door never opened. People walked by. A food delivery guy knocked, waited, and left. Days turned into a week. A building manager finally used a master key to enter. He came out a few minutes later, looking confused, and made a phone call. She went in. She never came out. The video fuzzed, the screen dissolving into static. For a horrifying second, I thought I saw a face in the noise, a screaming mouth and wide eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Then new text appeared on the screen, white letters on a black background, typed out slowly, deliberately. ITWONTLETMELEAVEA. Cold sweat broke out across my entire body. It. The climbing shadow. It didn't just kill her. It trapped her. Here. And now this spirit, this digital ghost, was using my own laptop to show me what happened, to warn me. The screen flickered back to the search results page. The cursor moved again, its motion smooth and unnerving. It hovered over my smiling photo for a few seconds. A tribute, a memory. Then it slid across the screen. It opened a new tab. It typed Facebook with that same silent precision. It went to my profile page. My own stupid, smiling face filled the screen. The little white arrow rested on my picture, and it just stayed there. The message was clear, unmistakable. You're next. No, no, no. Dave was chanting under his breath, shaking his head. This isn't happening. This is not happening. I understood now. We weren't being haunted. We were being warned by the haunting. We were trapped in a cage with a monster, and the ghost of its last victim was screaming at us to get out. And then it happened. The final reveal. My laptop screen went black. Dave's phone, still on the floor from when he dropped it, lit up. The TV across the room, which had been off the whole time, sparked to life with a crackle of static. All three screens, in perfect sync, switched to show the same image. It was a video. The angle was from the ceiling. Looking down, it was this room. Our room, but it was different. Neater. A girl's touch. Mai's room. She was in the bed, sleeping, curled on her side. The only light was the faint blue glow of a digital alarm clock on the nightstand. The scene was perfectly calm, perfectly normal, for about 3 seconds. Then, from under the bed, something moved. It wasn't a hand. It wasn't a person. It was darkness. A patch of absolute black that seemed to peel itself away from the shadows under the bed frame. It had no shape, no form. It was a spill of living ink, flowing up and over the side of the mattress. It made no sound. Mai stirred in her sleep, as if sensing a change in temperature. She rolled onto her back. The blackness paused. Then it poured itself onto the bed, a liquid sheet of night. It moved towards her face, slow and deliberate. It covered her legs, her torso. It was like watching someone be consumed by a tide. She was still asleep, oblivious. Just as the shadow reached her neck, her eyes snapped open. They were wide with a terror so pure, so absolute it stole the air from my lungs. Her mouth opened to scream, but the black mass surged forward, covering her face in an instant. The video cut. All three screens went dead. The only thing left was the sound. Her scream. It wasn't loud. It was choked off the second it began. A wet, muffled, gurgling cry that was swallowed by silence. It was the most horrible sound I had ever heard. Dave made a sound like he was being strangled. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. We had just watched a murder. We had watched what happened in this very spot 1 year ago. We knew. We finally, truly knew what we were trapped in here with. The ghost of Mai wasn't trying to hurt us. She was showing us, warning us. This is what's coming for you. This is how you will die. The silence in the room was absolute. The screens were dark. The sounds were gone. There was only the ringing in my ears and the image of that girl's final, terrified eyes. And that's when we heard it. It wasn't a click. It wasn't a footstep. It was a sound that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. A low, deep rumble. A vibration that started in the soles of my feet and traveled up my spine, shaking the very atoms in my bones. It felt ancient and full of hate. It was the growl of a predator that knows it has cornered its prey. Dave and I looked at each other, our eyes wide with the same dawning, sickening realization. The sound wasn't coming from the hallway, it wasn't coming from outside the window, it was coming from right under the bed. The rumble was not a sound, it was a pressure. It started in the floor, a deep gut vibration that moved through the soles of our shoes, up our legs, and settled in our teeth. The fillings of my back molars hummed. We were inside a giant turning gear, inside the belly of a whale. Dave's eyes were white dinner plates in the gloom. His mouth was a black O. He tried to speak, but only a dry click came out. He swallowed, licked his lips, and tried again. "What is it?" The whisper was a puff of air, instantly dead in the thick silence that followed the rumble. I couldn't answer. I couldn't form words. My entire brain was one giant, screaming alarm, telling me to run, but my legs were stoned. My eyes were glued to the space under the bed. The dust bunnies, the lost sock, the darkness. It was the same ordinary darkness that had been there an hour ago, but now I knew it wasn't empty. We had seen its work. We had heard its last meal. And now it was awake. It knew we were here. It knew that we knew. The bed frame began to vibrate, not just a hum, but a violent, shuddering shake. It was a small earthquake centered directly beneath us. A low groan of tortured wood joined the rumbling, which was now rising in pitch. Then came the smoke. It wasn't smoke. It was too dark, too thick. It moved with a purpose. Thin, greasy tendrils of blackness began to seep from under the bed skirt. They didn't rise like normal smoke. They slithered, hugging the floor, coiling like black oil serpents. The first wisp reached the leg of my jeans, and I hissed, stumbling backward, kicking my leg out as if I'd been touched by a spider. But it wasn't there. It was just a creeping stain on the air, and the smell hit us. It was swamp gas and butcher shop floors. The wet, heavy scent of old soil and something that had been left in the sun too long. Dave gagged, his hand flying to his mouth. The smell filled the room, a physical presence, coating the back of my throat. The black fog was pooling now, spreading across the cheap carpet, a growing slick of pure night. It was an oil spill of wrongness. We had to get out. The thought was a flare in the panic. Out of this room, out of this apartment. Bam! The bedroom door, the one we had so uselessly barricaded with the wardrobe, shuddered in its frame. The sound was like a car crash. Splinters of wood exploded from the door jamb. Dave and I both yelled, spinning to face the new threat. Bam! The whole wall shook. The cheap art I'd hung there rattled. This wasn't a person. This was a battering ram. This was a force of nature trying to get in. My mind raced. Get to the living room. Get to the front door. We could make it. We could. A thought hit me. A cold, clean piece of logic that cut through the noise. We had jammed the wardrobe against the door. The banging was coming from the other side. From the living room. Not from the hallway. From inside the apartment. My blood went cold. My breath hitched. I looked from the spreading black fog on the floor to the splintering door. Dave saw it on my face. The sickening math. That thing under the bed and the thing in the living room were the same. It wasn't just under the bed. It wasn't just in the living room. It was the whole damn apartment. We weren't in a room with a monster. We were in the monster's stomach. Then a new voice. Not a sound. It was inside my head. A girl's voice, stretched and torn by static and terror. Mai's voice. Run! The command broke the spell. My legs unlocked. My survival instinct screamed louder than the banging. The window, I yelled, my voice cracking. The balcony! Now! We didn't hesitate. We scrambled away from the growing black pool on the floor, away from the shuddering door. We lunged for the sliding glass door that led to the tiny balcony. It was our only way out. My hands fumbled with the cheap plastic lock. It was stiff. My palms were slick with sweat. It's stuck! Dave yelled, his voice frayed with panic. He threw his shoulder against the glass. It rattled but didn't budge. Pull! Don't push! I shouted, yanking on the handle with all my weight. Behind us, the banging on the door stopped. The silence that followed was worse. The black fog on the floor churned. The floorboards groaned. Then they cracked. It happened right between us and the bed. The wood splintered upwards, not downwards. A long, jagged line raced across the floor like a bolt of black lightning. It wasn't a crack. It was an opening. And from that opening, they rose. They weren't tentacles. They had no suckers, no texture. They were smooth, boneless limbs of solid shadow, like the fog given form and muscle. 5 of them. 10. They whipped through the air, silent and fast. The smell of rot intensified, a wave of nausea that made my head swim. We were no longer trying to be quiet. We were 2 animals in a trap, screaming and pulling at the stuck door. "It won't open!" Dave shrieked, his voice breaking into a sob. One of the black limbs lashed out. It was faster than I could track. It coiled around Dave's right ankle. His scream was not human. It was a raw, torn sound of pure agony and terror. He was yanked off his feet, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. "Alex, help!" He scrabbled at the carpet, his fingers digging in uselessly as the black limb dragged him, inch by inch, toward the splintered maw on the floor. More limbs rose from the crack, reaching for him, eager. I saw it all in a flash. Dave being pulled into the floor, the churning black fog, the video of Mai, her eyes, her choked-off scream. No, not again, not him. There was no thought, only action. I let go of the door handle, spun around, and grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, the cheap, heavy-based floor lamp from the corner. I ripped its cord from the wall and swung it like a madman. It wasn't a bat. It was clumsy and awkward, but it was all I had. I brought the heavy metal base down the glass door. Crack! The glass spiderwebbed but held. The black limbs were all over Dave now, pulling him faster. I screamed, a wordless roar of fury and terror, and swung again. Crash! The tempered glass exploded outwards in a shower of sharp, glittering cubes. Cold night air rushed in, a shock to my lungs. The roar of the city below was a distant, uncaring sea. "Dave!" I dropped the lamp, lunged forward, and grabbed his arms. It was like a tug-of-war with a demon. I pulled. The thing pulled back. His body was a rope, being torn in 2. His face was contorted, purple, his eyes bulging. The limbs were pulling him, stretching him. I felt his shoulder pop. He cried out, a wet, gurgling sound. I dug my heels in, leaning back with every ounce of strength I didn't know I had. My muscles burned, my back screamed. For a second, nothing moved. A stalemate. Then, with a final, desperate heave, I pulled him free. He came loose with a sickening, tearing sound. He tumbled backwards with me, and we crashed onto the glass-strewn floor of the balcony. We were out. We were on the other side. But not all of him. I looked back through the shattered doorway. One of the black limbs was retracting back into the floor. It was not empty. It was holding a prize. It had ripped Dave's sneaker clean off his foot. The limb held the white running shoe for a moment, almost proudly, a trophy of the hunt. Then it slipped back into the crack in the floorboards, pulling the shoe down with it into the darkness. The crack sealed itself. The floor was whole again. The black fog receded, sucked back under the bed like a reverse tide. The room was silent, still. Dave lay on the balcony next to me, gasping, sobbing, clutching his bare, bleeding foot. I scrambled to my feet, my body shaking uncontrollably. I grabbed the handle of the broken sliding door and pulled it shut with a grating shriek of bent metal on metal. It didn't close all the way, leaving a jagged gap, but it was a barrier. We were on a balcony, 20 stories up, trapped outside our own apartment. The wind whipped around us, cold and sharp. Below, the city lights twinkled. A whole world of people who were safe, who were sleeping, who had no idea what was happening in the dark spaces above their heads. We were freezing, bleeding, and trapped. But we were alive. I looked at Dave, his body curled into a shaking ball. I looked at the dark room through the broken glass. It was just a room again. Empty. Quiet. Then my eyes fell on the floor where his shoe had been taken. There, on the pristine wood where the crack had been, was a single, dark, wet spot. Like oil. And it was slowly, very slowly, beginning to spread. The wind hit me first. A hard, cold slap of reality. It tore at my clothes, a physical thing trying to peel me off the side of the building. We were on a plank of concrete, 12 stories up. A tiny raft in a sea of night, Below, the city was a smear of distant, indifferent lights. Dave was making a noise. A wet, broken sound, half sob, half choke. He was curled up, rocking back and forth, clutching his foot where the shoe used to be. Blood, dark in the moonlight, slicked his sock and stained the concrete. "We're dead," he gasped, his voice thin in the wind. "Oh God, Alex, we're dead." My brain was starting to work again, rebooting through the static of panic. The cold helped. It was sharp. It was real. Unlike the black fog on the floor that opened up like a mouth. He was right. We were trapped. The door behind us was a mangled wreck of metal and shattered glass. The thing was in there. The drop in front of us was a guaranteed end. "No," I said. My own voice sounded hollow. "No, we're not." My eyes scanned the brickwork, the wind, the sheer drop. Then I saw it, the next apartment over. Its balcony was identical to ours. A mirror image. It was close, so close it was impossible. Maybe 5 feet, a 5-foot gap of nothing, with a 12-story fall waiting in it. "Dave," I said, my voice low and urgent. "Dave, look." I pointed. He followed my finger, his eyes wide and vacant. He saw the other balcony. The hope in his face died as soon as it was born. No way, Alex. I can't." "You have to. We'll fall. We'll die if we stay here," I snapped back, a new kind of fear giving me an edge. The fear of inaction. That's when movement caught my eye. Inside our apartment. Through the jagged hole where the glass door used to be. It wasn't one shadow. It was several. Dark shapes sliding through the living room, darker than the unlit space around them. They moved with a loping, unnatural gait, like animals pacing a cage. They weren't searching for us. They were patrolling, lording over their new territory. I grabbed Dave's arm, hard. "Get back! Get against the wall!" We pressed ourselves against the cold brick, trying to make ourselves smaller. One of the shadows stopped its pacing. It turned toward the balcony. It drifted closer to the broken frame of the door, moving with a smoothness that made the hair on my arm stand up. It came to a stop just inside the apartment, a silhouette against the deeper blackness of the room. Then it leaned forward, a face pressed against the remaining shards of glass. But it wasn't a face. There were no features, no eyes a person could see, no nose to break up the shape. It was a smooth, pale oval of skin, stretched tight, and in the center of it, a mouth. Just a mouth. It was closed at first, a thin, dark line. Then it opened. It stretched wide, wider than any human mouth should. It was a silent, black hole in the center of that horrifying blankness. It didn't make a sound. It just stared at us with its lipless, screaming mouth. A void that promised to swallow everything. My breath caught in my throat. I felt a whimper escape my lips before I could stop it. Dave saw it too. He made a gagging sound and squeezed his eyes shut. The faceless thing stayed there, pressed to the glass, its mouth gaping, watching us, waiting. The doorframe began to vibrate. It was a low hum at first, the kind you feel in your bones. Then it grew into a violent shudder. The bent metal screeched as it was pushed, bent further. Shards of glass, still clinging to the frame, rattled with a high, thin sound, like 1,000 tiny bells. It wanted out. It was coming for us. I waited for Mai's voice. The mental static. The torn, desperate scream of a warning. Nothing. There was only the sound of the wind, the grinding of metal, and the heavy thud of my own heart against my ribs. The silence from her was worse than any noise the creature could make. It was an answer, a confirmation. That thing, whatever it was, it had her now. It had swallowed her warning. It had swallowed her. We were alone. Utterly, completely alone. The metal frame bulged outwards. A long, groaning tear appeared as a screw was ripped from the brickwork. There was no more time. No more thinking. "The jump!" I yelled at Dave, my voice cracking over the noise. "It's the only way! You go first!" He looked at me, his face a mask of pure terror. He shook his head. I can't. You will! I screamed, grabbing his shoulders and shaking him. It's 5 feet! You can do it! On 3! 1! I didn't give him a choice. I didn't let him think. 2! The doorframe let out a final ear-splitting shriek of tortured metal. It was about to give way. 3! Jump, Dave! Jump! He pushed off. It was clumsy, a desperate scramble more than a leap. For one terrible second, he hung in the air, his arms flailing. His fingers scraped the edge of the other balcony. They caught. He grunted, his body slamming against the concrete railing. He dangled for a moment, his good leg kicking wildly for purchase before he managed to hook it over the edge and haul his trembling body onto the safety of the other side. He made it. My turn. I took a deep breath, backed up as far as I could, the brick scraping my back. My eyes were locked on that 5-foot space, on Dave's hand, reaching out for me. Bam! The world exploded in noise and force. The entire door frame burst outwards, ripped from the wall in a shower of plaster and bent metal. It wasn't one thing that came through. It was a limb, a solid black limb, the same kind that had grabbed Dave inside. It moved too fast to see, a whip of pure shadow. It struck me square in the back. It wasn't a sharp pain. It was a dead, heavy impact, like being hit with a sledgehammer. The air rushed out of my lungs in a single, painful gasp. My legs buckled. My forward momentum from my planned jump turned into a dead fall. I pitched forward, not across the gap, but down into it. The city lights spiraled below me. This is it. A hand clamped around my wrist. Hard. It was Dave. He had lunged forward, grabbing my arm, his face a mess of tears and effort. His grip was the only thing between me and the long drop. I was hanging, my body swinging in the empty space between the balconies. My back screamed in protest. Every muscle in Dave's arm must have been on fire. I got you, Alex, he screamed, his voice raw. I twisted my neck, my body dangling uselessly. I looked up, back at my apartment. Back at the ruined doorway I had just been thrown from. The thing that hit me was gone, retreated back into the gloom. But the doorway was not empty. In the crushing darkness of my apartment, a pair of red eyes blinked open. They glowed with their own faint, malevolent light. Then another pair opened next to them. And another. And another. Soon the entire doorway, from the floor to the ceiling, was filled with them, dozens of them. Small, burning embers of crimson hate, all fixed on me. They weren't moving, they were just watching me hang there, a captured animal, suspended over the abyss. The faceless thing was not the monster, it was just the bait on the hook. We were never in a room with a monster. We were in a nest. A grunt, a raw, guttural sound ripped from Dave's throat. He hauled, muscles screaming, his face a mask of straining sinew. My fingers scraped over the sharp edge of the concrete railing. Then my chest, my stomach. I flopped onto the balcony like a fish on a pier, the impact jarring through every bone. I couldn't breathe. I could only gasp, sucking in the cold night air. We lay there on the concrete, 2 heaps of shivering meat. The wind howled around us, indifferent. I looked at Dave. He was on his side, curled around his ruined foot, his whole body trembling. My own back felt like a hollow space, a deep, bruised ache where that thing had hit me. I forced myself to look back. Across the 5-foot gap of nothing, the doorway to my apartment was a black, jagged mouth. The red eyes were gone. The silence that came from that darkness was worse than the screeching metal, worse than the screaming. It was a patient silence, a satisfied silence. We're alive, Dave whispered. It wasn't a statement of victory, it was a question. I pushed myself up onto my elbows. The world spun for a second. Yeah, we're alive. We had to move. Staying here was not an option. My eyes fixed on the sliding glass door of the apartment we were now trespassing on. It was dark. No lights, no sign of life. No one's home, I said, my voice hoarse. We break in, find a phone, call the cops, tell them whatever the hell we can. Dave nodded, his eyes wide and glassy. Okay, yeah, okay. I got to my knees, then to my feet. A bolt of fire shot up my spine. I bit back a cry, leaning against the cold brick wall. The pain was a good reminder. It was real. It meant I wasn't dead yet. My eyes scanned the small balcony. A couple of dead plants in cheap plastic pots, and next to one, a loose brick. Probably used to prop something up once. Perfect. I picked it up. It felt heavy, solid, real. A tool, a weapon. I took a step toward the glass door, lining up my shoulder, getting ready to smash my way to safety. My knuckles were white around the brick. Then I stopped. Something was wrong. I leaned closer, my breath fogging a small patch on the pane. The door wasn't fully closed. A dark vertical line, no wider than my thumb, ran from the top of the frame to the bottom. It was already open, just a crack. They don't lock their balcony door? 12 stories up? My mind raced. Maybe they forgot. People forget things. It happens. It's normal. But the word normal felt like a language I no longer spoke. After the black fog, the faceless thing, the nest of red eyes, there was no more normal. There was only before, and this. This was too easy. This was a gift. And I didn't trust gifts anymore. I lowered the brick, placing it silently on the concrete. I held up a hand to Dave. He saw the look on my face, and his own went rigid. I put a finger to my lips. He nodded, his breathing hitched. My fingers touched the cold metal of the door handle. I paused, listening. There was only the wind. I pushed. It slid open without a single sound. The tracks were clean. Oiled, maybe. The movement was smooth, effortless. The door to a tomb opening. A new smell hit me. It rolled out of the dark apartment, thick and cloying. Not the smell of dust or stale air. It was sweet, perfumed, an organic, decaying sweetness. Lilies. The smell of a funeral parlor. My stomach clenched. I slipped inside, Dave hobbling right behind me. He closed the door, and the sound of the wind was cut off. The silence in here was absolute. It pressed in on my ears. My eyes adjusted to the gloom. The faint light from the city outside cast long shadows across a living room. It was clean, spotless. A dark leather couch, a glass coffee table, a large TV silent on the wall. Everything was arranged with a cold, geometric precision. It looked like a page from a furniture catalog, like nobody actually lived here. But someone did. Or they had. A shape on the coffee table drew my eye. In the center of the glass, perfectly aligned with the edges of the table, was a picture frame. Silver. About 5 by 7. It was the only thing on the table. It was lying face down. Why would you put a picture face down? The phone, Dave whispered, his voice a dry rasp. Check the kitchen. I'll try the bedroom. He limped past me, his focus a pinpoint laser on escape. He didn't seem to notice the smell, or the frame. He just wanted out. I wanted out too, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. I couldn't take my eyes off that frame. It was a deliberate act. An invitation. A question left for someone to answer. I had to know. My hand shook as I reached for it. The metal was cold. Colder than the air. I took a breath and turned it over. A family. A man with a kind, goofy smile, his arm around a woman with bright, laughing eyes. A little boy, no older than 6 or 7, sat on his father's shoulders, making a peace sign with his fingers. They were on a sunny beach. Happy. Normal. A wave of relief washed over me so powerful it made me dizzy. It was just a family. A normal family who forgot to lock their door. The lilies were for a party or an anniversary. The frame got knocked over. Simple explanations. My panicking brain was making monsters out of shadows. I let out a shaky breath. I was about to call out to Dave, to tell him it was all okay, when my eyes focused on the photo again. Not on the family, on the background. It wasn't a beach. The lighting was strange, artificial. The sun was a fluorescent glow. The sand was the textured concrete of a balcony floor, and the ocean behind them was a night sky, dotted with the distant lights of the city. They weren't at a beach, they were on a balcony. My blood went cold. I knew that balcony. I knew the specific pattern of the brickwork behind the woman's head. I knew the exact angle of the metal railing the man was leaning against. It was my balcony. Apartment 1204. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird, and then I saw her. Standing in the background, partially hidden behind the smiling man, almost blending into the shadows of the doorway leading into my apartment. A figure. A woman with long, dark hair that fell over one shoulder. Her face was a pale oval in the gloom, her head tilted as if she were listening to the photographer. There was a small, private smile on her lips. It was Mai. No, it couldn't be. I brought the picture closer, my knuckles white. The photo paper was thick, glossy. The colors were vibrant, sharp. There was no fading, no yellowing of age. It wasn't an old photo. It was new. It could have been taken last week. It could have been taken last night. The pieces clicked into place with a series of horrible, shattering sounds inside my head. Mai's texts, her warnings to get out, her fear. It wasn't for me, it was for them. She wasn't a victim being hunted. She was the lure, the friendly neighbor, the one who earned your trust, the one who invited you over to her place for a drink and had a friend take a picture, a final picture. Her scream in my head, it wasn't a warning, it was a celebration. Alex. The voice from the bedroom hallway was a dead thing, a reanimated corpse of Dave's voice. All the panic and adrenaline had been scraped out of it, leaving only a hollow shell. Alex, Jesus Christ, get in here, now! The photo slipped from my numb fingers. It hit the leg of the coffee table, and the glass front spiderwebbed with a sharp crack. I didn't care. I stumbled toward the hallway, toward Dave's voice. I didn't run. My legs wouldn't obey. I reached the bedroom doorway. Dave was standing inside, his back to me, staring at the far wall. His good hand was braced against the doorframe as if to hold himself up. He was shaking. What is it? I asked, my own voice sounding distant. He didn't turn. He just lifted a trembling finger and pointed. That wall! I stepped into the room, my eyes following his finger. The air was thick with the smell of lilies and something else. Something old and dry, like paper and dust. The wall wasn't painted, it was covered. From the ceiling to the floor, from one corner to the other, it was a meticulously organized collage of paper. Newspaper clippings. Dozens and dozens of them, pinned neatly in a grid. Each one yellowed with age to a different degree. Some were almost brown, others just faintly beige. A timeline of decay. A museum of sorrow. I took a step closer. The headline swam before my eyes. College junior vanishes from downtown apartment. Newlyweds missing. Foul play feared in Z Tower case. Another mysterious disappearance from high-rise. My eyes darted from one to the next. A frantic, sickened search for what? I didn't know. But my brain was catching details, stitching them together. The dates spanned a decade. 2012, 2014, 2017, 2021. And the address. Every article, every time, mentioned the same building. The same floor. The same apartment. Apartment 1204. My apartment. My gaze fell from the words to the pictures. Each clipping had a photograph of the victim. A young woman with a hopeful smile, her graduation cap tilted on her head. A grinning couple, arms around each other, standing in front of a moving truck. A middle-aged man in a cheap suit, his expression tired but kind. Face after face. Life after life. All of them had made the same mistake I had. They had moved into apartment 1204. This wasn't a home, it was a processing facility. We hadn't escaped the nest. We had just found the trophy room. The words blurred. The black ink of the headlines swam in front of my eyes, a tide of past tragedies. I reached out a hand, bracing myself against the wall, my fingers brushing against the brittle, yellowed edge of a clipping from 2012. College junior vanishes. The face in the photo was a girl, maybe 20, smiling at a world that was about to swallow her whole. Next to her, a honeymooning couple from 2017. Newlyweds missing, foul play feared. They were grinning, arms around each other, blissfully unaware they were posing for their own obituary. Face after face. Life after life, all funneled into one black hole. Apartment 1204. My apartment. The air was thick with the funeral parlor smell of lilies, but now it mixed with the dry, dusty scent of old paper and forgotten deaths. This wasn't a home. It wasn't a place of safety. It was a processing facility, a slaughterhouse with a view. We hadn't escaped the beast's lair. We had stumbled into the butcher's office. This is a record, Dave choked out, his voice thin. He was still standing in the doorway, his skin the color of ash. He was keeping a record of it. My brain, numb and slow, latched onto that. A record. He knew, I whispered, the thought solidifying. The guy who lives here. He knows what's in that apartment. He's been watching it. Dave limped further into the room, his eyes scanning the cold, sterile space beyond the bedroom. His gaze swept over the minimalist furniture, the spotless floor, the dark TV. This place wasn't a home. It was an observation deck. Then he knows how to stop it, Dave said, a sliver of desperate hope in his voice. Or how to fight it. We have to find him, Alex. We have to find this guy. Now. He was right. Panic was a useless luxury. We needed answers. We needed a weapon. This neighbor, this ghost who documented the abyss next door, was our only lead. I turned from the wall of the dead, forcing myself to look away from their smiling faces. It felt like turning my back on my own grave. Okay, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Okay, let's find him. We moved out of the bedroom, back into the living area. The place was unnervingly neat. No clutter, no mail on the table, no shoes by the door. It was like a hotel room that had been professionally cleaned, waiting for the next guest. My eyes fell on a small, dark wood desk tucked into a corner. It was just as tidy as the rest of the apartment. A sleek, modern lamp. A pen holder with a single, expensive-looking pen. And a book. A black, leather-bound notebook, lying perfectly square in the center of the desk. It was the only thing that felt personal. The only thing that suggested a person actually sat here and did things. I walked toward it, my feet silent on the hardwood floor. Dave followed, his bad foot making a soft, dragging sound behind me. I reached the desk. My hand hovered over the notebook. It felt like I was about to touch a snake. What is it? Dave whispered. I don't know, I said. His journal, maybe. I opened it. The paper was thick, creamy. The handwriting inside was not the wild scrawl of a madman. It was small, precise, and clinical. The script of a scientist. The first page was dated 3 years ago. Entry 1. Subject designated, The Harvester. Occupies apartment 1204, Z Tower. Nature, unknown. Suspected extra-dimensional or residual entity. Primary characteristic. Predatory dormancy. My blood ran cold. He'd given it a name. My eyes jumped down the page, scanning the neat, detached prose. Quiescent phase observed to last between 14 and 38 months. Phase transition triggered by new tenancy in 1204. The introduction of new biological and psychic energy appears to act as a catalyst, initiating the active cycle. Nausea rolled in my stomach. The broker who sold me the apartment. The low rent. The quick move-in. I wasn't a tenant. I was bait. I flipped the page. More entries. Drier. More analytical. Active cycle consists of 3 distinct phases. Phase 1. Probing. Minor auditory and physical phenomena. Misplaced objects. Paresthesia in the subject. Sensation of being watched. Designed to heighten stress and uncertainty. Duration. 1 to 3 weeks. The keys not being where I left them. The strange clicks from the vents. The feeling, always, that I wasn't alone. It wasn't my imagination. It was a script. A fucking playbook. Phase 2. Gaslighting and isolation. Escalation of phenomena. Direct manipulation of the subject's immediate environment. Technology. Personal effects. Goal is to discredit the subject's sanity to themselves and others. Introduction of controlled auditory hallucinations, mimicked voices, etc. The texts from the picture on the table. It wasn't just trying to scare me. It was trying to break my mind before it broke my body. I kept turning pages. A frantic, sickened flipping. It was all there. A detached, horrifyingly academic study of the monster that lived through the wall. He detailed its methods, its patterns. He theorized about its origins. But there was no emotion, no horror, no pity for the faces on the wall in the other room. Just observation. The cold curiosity of a biologist studying wasps in a jar. "What does it say?" Dave asked, his voice tight. "It knows everything," I rasped, my throat dry. "He knows everything, how it works, what it does. He calls it the Harvester." The name hung in the air between us, heavy and real. My fingers felt clumsy as I turned to the last written page. The handwriting here was the same, just as neat. But the ink was different. It was a darker black. Sharper. It looked wet. My breath caught in my chest. At the top of the page, a new heading. New subject acquired. Tenant, Alex Taylor. Age, 28. Status, lives alone. Profile, ideal. Observation commenced. Below it, a series of dated entries, tracking my first few weeks in the apartment. My life reduced to a handful of bullet points and a madman's logbook. Day 3, Phase 1 initiated. Subject reports auditory anomaly. Clicking. Standard response. Day 9, subject experiences paresthesia. Mentioned on phone call to mother. Emotional state degrading as predicted. Day 14, introduction of lure construct my. Subject receptive. Trust established. The words blurred. My own name. My own life. A bug under a microscope. And then I saw the final entry. The entry for tonight. The ink was so fresh I could almost smell it. Day 19. Subject's acquaintance, David Keller, introduced as unplanned variable. Harvester agitated. Acceleration to Phase 3. Direct introduction. Contact appears to have been successful. A drop of sweat fell from my forehead and hit the page, smudging the word successful. This wasn't a record of the victims. It was a log of the hunt. And we were the latest entry. The neighbor wasn't just an observer. He was part of it. A conductor, orchestrating the whole goddamn symphony. "Alex?" Dave's voice was sharp. "What is it? What did you find?" I couldn't speak. I just turned the notebook towards him. He leaned in, his eyes scanning the page. I watched his face go from confusion to disbelief to pure, undiluted terror. His good hand flew to his mouth, stifling a gasp. "Oh, God," he breathed. "Oh, my God. He's not watching it. He's feeding it." The thought, spoken aloud, was a physical blow. We weren't trespassers who had found a researcher's notes. We were lab rats who had found the exit to our maze, only to realize it led directly into the experimenter's office. We had to get out. Not just out of the apartment, but out of the building. Run. Disappear. And in that exact moment, as the realization crashed down on us with its full, suffocating weight, we heard it, a sound from the hallway. The soft, metallic slide of a key into a lock. Click! The deadbolt turned. My heart stopped. Dave and I froze, two statues carved from ice, our eyes locked. The front door of the apartment swung silently inward. A man stood in the doorway. He was middle-aged, with neat salt and pepper hair and a kind face. He wore a clean-pressed button-down shirt and casual slacks. He looked like someone's dad. He looked exactly like the man in the photograph on the coffee table. The man with the goofy smile, holding his son on a sunny beach that wasn't a beach at all. He looked at me. He looked at Dave. He looked at the notebook in my hands. Then he smiled. It was not a goofy smile. It was a calm, placid smile of immense satisfaction, the smile of a man whose complex hypothesis had just been proven correct. "Hello, boys," he said. His voice was pleasant, reasonable. "I see you found my research." He took a step inside, letting the door close softly behind him. He wasn't armed. He wasn't threatening. He just stood there, looking at us as if we were a pair of fascinating specimens. "You can't imagine how long I've been working on this," he continued, his tone conversational. "The variables, the failed attempts, trying to get definitive proof. People just disappear. The authorities write it off. No one listens. No one believes." He took another step closer. My entire body was screaming at me to run, to fight, to do something. But I was paralyzed. My feet were lead. "But you believe me, don't you?" he said, his eyes glittering. "You've seen it. You've felt it. You are the proof." He looked from my face to Dave's ruined foot, a flicker of academic interest in his gaze. "See? I told you it was real." He raised his hand. He was holding something, a small, black device, no bigger than a TV remote. It had a single silver button on the top and a small, mesh-covered speaker at one end. It looked like nothing I had ever seen before. "It took me years to isolate the frequency," he said, his voice filled with a quiet, triumphant pride. "The one that agitates it, the one that calls it to the surface." He looked directly at me, his kind eyes filled with an awful, burning light. "It's hungry. It's been so long since its last proper meal." My mind finally broke free. "Stay away from us," I snarled, taking a step back, pulling Dave with me. The man's smile widened. It was a terrible sight. A crack in a mask of sanity. "But the experiment isn't over," he said softly, and he pressed the button. There was no explosion, no gunshot, just a sound that wasn't a sound. It was a pressure inside my skull, a high, piercing whine that vibrated behind my eyeballs and made my teeth ache. It was impossibly high, a silent scream that tore through the air. Dave cried out, clutching his head. I staggered back, my ears ringing, the world tilting on its axis. And from the other side of the wall, from my apartment, an answer came. It wasn't a screech, it wasn't a yell, it was a low, resonant roar. A sound of pure, bottomless fury. A sound that came not from a throat, but from the very foundations of the building. The floor beneath my feet trembled. A fine mist of dust shook loose from the ceiling and rained down on us. The glass in the picture frame on the coffee table, already cracked, shattered completely. The roar was one of rage, of hunger, of a slumbering god being woken by a dinner bell. The man in the shirt lowered the device, the high-pitched keen cutting off. The silence that followed was worse. It was filled with the echo of that impossible roar. He looked at the trembling wall, then back at us. The placid smile was gone, replaced by a look of wild, ecstatic insanity. His face was flushed with a terrifying joy. He laughed, a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "It's feeding time," he said. The roar subsided, but the silence it left behind was worse. It was a vacuum, filled with the echo of a nightmare. My own breathing sounded like a stranger's, loud and ragged in the small, clean apartment. Dave was a statue beside me, his face a mask of white plaster. The man, Keller, just stood there. The monstrous joy on his face had settled into a look of deep, professional satisfaction, like a chef admiring his perfect soufflé. "Feeding time," he had said. The words didn't compute, they were just sounds. What are you?" I finally managed to push the words out. My throat was sand. Keller smiled faintly, a gesture that did not reach his eyes. "Me? I am the caretaker, the steward." He spoke calmly, as if explaining a tedious but necessary bit of household maintenance. "My family has been watching this place for generations. We have a covenant, an arrangement. It resides in the empty space, and in return for our service, we prosper." He gestured around the pristine apartment, the expensive furniture, the clean lines. This wasn't a home, it was payment. "Service?" Dave spat, his voice trembling with a mix of fury and terror. "You're feeding it, people." "Not people," Keller corrected, his tone still perfectly level. "Subjects, variables. It requires a certain kind of energy, loneliness, despair, isolation." His eyes flicked to me. "You were perfect, Alex. The ideal candidate profile. No local family, new to the city, working from home. A self-contained ecosystem of anxiety. The harvester is very particular." My stomach churned. The low rent, the easy application. I wasn't a tenant. I was livestock, selected and delivered. "You're a monster," I whispered. "I am a scientist," he countered, his voice hardening for the first time. He walked over to a blank section of the wall near his desk and pressed a nearly invisible switch. A small, dark square on the wall lit up. It was a screen. It took my brain a second to process the image. It was my living room, seen from a high corner, near the ceiling. A grainy black and white feed from a hidden camera. My blood ran cold. The privacy of my home, my sanctuary, had been a lie from the moment I signed the lease. He had been watching everything. Every nervous tick, every phone call, every sleepless night. The previous subject was problematic, Keller said, his gaze fixed on the screen. The college girl. She had a very strong psychic residue, a stubborn will. It made the harvest messy. As he spoke, a flicker of movement on the screen. A shape coalesced near my couch. A translucent, wavering outline of a young woman. Her face was indistinct, but I could feel the desperation radiating from the image, even through the cheap monitor. Her spirit lingered, Keller said with a sigh of academic annoyance. It attempts to interfere, tries to warn the new subjects. It's quite a nuisance, really. Always moving things, creating cold spots, weakens the initial phases of the cycle. He glanced at me. But don't worry, each cycle erodes it a little more. After you, there probably won't be anything left of her. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. The ghost wasn't a threat. She was a victim, screaming a warning no one could hear. Then, a new sound began. It started low. A wet, grinding noise. It came from the wall between Keller's apartment and mine. A hairline crack appeared in the plaster, right in the center of the room. It spider-webbed outwards, moving with a speed that wasn't natural. Crack. T-tier. RRR. It wasn't the sound of dry plaster breaking. It was the sound of something wet being torn apart. Ah, Keller said, a note of anticipation in his voice. The partition is thinning. It's hungry. From the widening cracks, a black, viscous fluid began to ooze. It wasn't oil. It wasn't tar. It dripped down the white wall in thick, pulsing rivulets, smelling of rotten meat and ozone. The floor beneath my feet buzzed with a low, constant vibration. It doesn't like to be kept waiting once the signal has been given, Keller continued conversationally. He began to back away from us, moving towards the apartment's front door. His hand reached behind him, feeling for the handle. The final phase is always so illuminating, so much data to collect. My mind screamed, "Run! Door! Get to the door!" But he was already there. He stepped back into the hallway. "This has been most productive. Thank you both for your contribution to the project." And he pulled the door shut. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was a final, metallic punctuation mark on our death sentence. Click! We were locked in. Not out. In. No! Dave roared. He lunged for the door, his bad foot giving way, and slammed his shoulder against the solid wood. It didn't budge. He pounded on it with his fists. "You son of a bitch! Let US out! Let US out!" The tearing sound from the wall became a wet ripping. A huge chunk of plaster and drywall tore loose and fell to the floor with a damp slap. The black ooze poured from the newly formed hole. It was a wound in the world. And from inside that wound, I could hear a low, chittering, slithering sound. Panic, pure and absolute, took over. My heart was a drum against my ribs. Fight or flight. There was no flight. The door was locked. The windows were 12 stories up. That left fight. But my eyes were fixed on the growing hole in the wall, on the darkness within, a darkness that was not empty. Dave turned from the door, his face a mess of sweat and terror. He saw the look on Keller's face through the peephole, a look of calm observation. That's what broke him. With a scream of pure rage, he launched himself away from the door, not at the wall, but at Keller's desk. He grabbed the heavy, modern lamp. "I'll kill you," he bellowed, his voice cracking, and he charged at the front door again, swinging the lamp like a club. He was going to try to break it down. He never made it. The door swung open again. Keller stood there, his expression unchanged. Impassive. Annoyed. In his hand was not the remote, but a black, compact taser. "Such a disruptive variable," he muttered. Dave was already in mid-swing, a cry of battle on his lips. He was too slow. Keller raised the taser. There was a loud Z-Z-Z-Z-Z-T that filled the room. Blue sparks danced between the prongs. The metal points touched Dave's chest. Dave's body went rigid. The scream cut off into a strangled grunt. His eyes went wide with shock, his entire body convulsing violently. The lamp dropped from his hand and shattered on the floor. He crumpled like a puppet whose strings had been cut, landing in a heap, twitching. A smell of burnt hair filled the air. I stood frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. It happened so fast. One moment, Dave was fighting. The next, he was just a pile of shuddering limbs on the floor. Keller stepped over him, back into the apartment. He gave Dave's still form a cursory glance, then looked at me. Then he looked at the wall. The entire center section of the wall exploded inwards. It wasn't a demolition. It was a birth. A wet, violent blast of plaster dust, splintered wood studs, and black ichor filled the room. And through the new, gaping doorway into my own personal hell, it came. There are no words for it. My mind refused to assemble it into a coherent shape. It was a tidal wave of biology gone wrong. A churning mass of slick, black tentacles that moved with a liquid grace. They were tipped not with suckers, but with twitching, multi-jointed fingers. Dozens of eyes, wet and yellow like a reptile's, blinked open across the heaving flesh, all swiveling to fixate on me. In the center of the mass, a mouth gaped open, not one mouth, but many, splitting the flesh in vertical and horizontal slits, each one lined with what looked like shards of broken glass. It slithered into the room, a sound of wet canvas being dragged over gravel. The smell was overwhelming now, a physical force that made me gag. It was the smell of a tomb and an abattoir. It ignored Dave's body on the floor. It ignored Keller, who stood by the door, watching with rapt attention, his research in its final, glorious stage. It came for me, the living one, the fresh meal. Time slowed to a crawl. I saw a tentacle, thick as my leg, uncoil and rise, the shard-like fingers at its tip, twitching in anticipation. The yellow eyes all stared into me, seeing nothing but food. This was it. The end. A footnote in a madman's journal. And then, something changed. Between me and the monstrosity, the air grew cold. A sharp, piercing cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. A figure shimmered into existence. It was her, Mai. She was more solid than she had been on the screen, but still translucent. I could see the writhing horror through her ghostly form. Her face was clear now, pale and etched with an eternal, silent terror. She was not looking at me, she was looking at the thing she had been running from for years. The harvester paused. Its many eyes blinked. It seemed, for a fraction of a second, confused by this echo, this old meal reserving itself. Mai raised a pale, shimmering hand. Her mouth opened in a scream that made no sound, a vacuum of pure agony that I felt in my bones. It was a scream of defiance. A last, desperate act. She didn't point at the monster. She didn't point at me. She pointed a single, steady, accusing finger directly at Keller. At the small, black remote he still held loosely in his other hand. Her message was clear. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was an answer. The harvester's main cluster of eyes swiveled, following her gesture. They focused on Keller, on the device in his hand. And in that instant, Mai's form dissolved, blown away like smoke in a hurricane, her silent screams swallowed by the sudden, absolute silence of the room. The scar was left. An image burned into my mind. A ghostly finger pointing the way. A final message from the abyss. The ghost's finger was a signpost in a hurricane. It didn't point to the exit, it pointed to the cause. The remote. The small, black rectangle in Keller's other hand. My brain didn't think. It just connected dots in a blind panic. The remote wasn't a doorbell. It was a dog whistle. A leash. A controller. Keller wasn't a priest performing a ritual. He was an operator. I had to get it. The harvester was a living wall of meat and eyes pouring into the room. Its tentacles, thick and glistening, slithered across the expensive hardwood floor, leaving trails of black slime. It was still focused on the space where Mai had been, its multiple mouths clicking and hissing in confusion. A momentary pause. My only chance. My eyes darted to the desk, to the heavy, leather-bound journal sitting next to the shattered lamp. Keller's research. His life's work. An impulse born of pure adrenaline took over. I scooped the book off the desk. It was heavier than I expected. My arm screamed in protest as I pivoted, putting all my weight, all my terror into the throw. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice a raw croak. The book flew through the air, a clumsy spinning projectile. It struck Keller square in the face with a solid, meaty thwack. He grunted, staggering back a step, his hand flying to his nose. Surprise, not pain, flashed across his features. His calm broke, his focus shattered. That was all I needed. I launched myself forward, not at him, but at his other hand, the hand holding the remote. My fingers closed around the smooth, cool plastic. His fingers tightened instantly, a grip like steel wires. "No," he hissed, his academic demeanor gone, replaced by the fury of a man whose experiment was being contaminated. We wrestled, a clumsy, desperate struggle in the shadow of the abomination. He was stronger than he looked, wiry and tough. He drove an elbow into my ribs, and I gasped, my grip weakening. He tried to twist the remote from my hand. I held on, my knuckles white. The beast behind us let out a low, guttural roar, a sound of growing impatience. The floor vibrated with it. Keller slammed my hand against the wall. A sharp pain shot up my arm. I cried out. My fingers went numb, and the remote slipped free. It skittered across the floor, spinning on the polished wood before coming to a stop, right next to Dave's head. He was still on the floor, twitching faintly. A low moan escaped his lips. The smell of burnt circuits and hair was thick around him. The harvester's confusion ended. The leash was off. The commands had stopped. Its 100 yellow eyes swiveled, breaking focus from the spot where the ghost had been. They no longer had a single target. They saw 2 struggling pieces of meat and one still one on the floor. Everything was food now. It howled, a sound that wasn't a roar but a high-pitched, tearing frequency, like metal being ripped apart on a massive scale. The remaining windows in the apartment didn't just crack. They exploded outward into the night air. A tentacle, thick as a fire hydrant, whipped through the room. It wasn't aimed at me. It wasn't aimed at Keller. It was just a spasm of pure, indiscriminate rage. I saw it coming and tried to duck. Too slow. The impact wasn't a sharp hit. It was a full-body shove from something impossibly heavy and wet. It felt like being hit by a waterlogged mattress thrown from a moving truck. The air was forced from my lungs in a single, silent gasp. I flew backward, my head connecting with the leg of the overturned desk with a dull, hollow thump. The room spun. Stars exploded behind my eyes. I landed in a heap, the side of my face wet and warm with blood. Keller screamed as the same tentacle caught him on its backswing. He was thrown in the opposite direction, slamming into the kitchen entryway. I heard a sickening crack as his body hit the doorframe. He slid to the floor, dazed. The room was no longer an apartment. It was a den. The black ichor was everywhere, dripping from the ceiling, pooling on the floor. The hole in the wall was wider now, pulsing like a wound, and more of the thing was pouring through. It was a tide of black flesh, a slow-motion avalanche of nightmares. The clean, modern lines of the apartment were being swallowed, covered in a moving, breathing layer of alien biology. Tentacles scraped against the ceiling, gouging deep furrows in the plaster. One of its many mouths gnashed against a floor lamp, shearing the metal in two with a screech of grinding teeth. It was consuming the space, erasing it. My head throbbed. The world swam in and out of focus. Through the haze of pain, I saw the remote. Still there, a small island of black plastic in a growing sea of slime, inches from Dave's still form. I had to get it. I pushed myself up, my arms shaking. My knees scraped against the floor, slick with the creature's filth. I started to crawl. Each movement was a universe of pain. My head felt like it was going to split open. "The device!" a voice rasped from across the room. It was Keller. He was pushing himself up too, his face a mask of blood and dirt. One of his arms hung at a strange angle. Broken. But his eyes, they were clear. They burned with a fanatic's light. "Don't touch it," he snarled, spitting a mouthful of blood onto the floor. "You'll ruin generations of work." He started crawling too. A macabre race on hands and knees between two broken men. A race to the detonator. The harvester paid us no mind. It was busy. One of its larger appendages, this one ending not in fingers but in a gaping vertical maw, slid toward Keller. It was methodical, curious. The master was wounded. The master was bleeding. The master smelled like food. Keller saw it coming. His eyes went wide. The arrogance, the scientific curiosity, it all evaporated, replaced by the same primal terror I felt. "No!" he screamed, not at me, but at his creation, his God. "No, wait! The Covenant! I am the steward!" The creature did not seem to care about the Covenant. I scrambled faster, my fingers stretching, reaching. My hand closed over Dave's leg. It was limp. I pushed myself forward, ignoring the fire in my skull. My fingertips brushed the smooth plastic of the remote. Behind me, Keller's scream cut off into a wet, gurgling crunch. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I snatched the remote. It felt solid in my trembling, sweaty palm. A weapon. A prayer. A last resort. I didn't know what the buttons did. There was no time to learn. I just aimed it in the general direction of the writhing chaos that had been the center of the room. My thumb hammered down on every button it could find. On, off, volume, channel, it didn't matter. I pressed them all. Again and again. One of them had to be the right one of them had to be the kill switch. A sound erupted from the monster. It wasn't a roar of anger. It wasn't a gurgle of feeding. It was a shriek. A thin, high-frequency scream of pure, electronic agony. It was the sound of 1,000 modems dying at once, amplified to the threshold of pain. It cut through the air, through my skull, vibrating in my teeth. The thrashing stopped. The entire black mass of the harvester convulsed. It began to pull back, retracting from the walls, from the floor. The tentacles recoiled as if from a hot iron. The ichor sizzled and steamed where it touched the ground. It was working. It was actually working. But it didn't disappear. It didn't vanish back into the hole in the wall. It pulled itself together. It contracted into a single quivering sphere of flesh in the center of the ruined room. The hole to my apartment was still there. A ragged, wet wound in reality. Then, the yellow eyes began to move. They had been staring at the spot where Keller had been. A pulpy, red ruin I refused to look at. But now, one by one, then, in a great, sweeping wave, they turned. They moved past the wreckage, past Dave's unconscious body. They all swiveled and focused directly on me. All 100 of them. They weren't looking at me with hunger anymore. The predatory gaze was gone. It had been replaced by something infinitely worse. Recognition. And hatred. In my hand, the remote felt suddenly cold. I looked down at it, then back up at the silent, vibrating mass of eyes. A single, sickening realization crashed over me, worse than any tentacle, colder than any ghost. I hadn't found the off switch. I'd just picked up the leash, and I'd just used it to hurt its master. I wasn't prey anymore. I was the new threat. I was the new source of its pain. And it was staring right at me. The silence was worse than the screaming. 100 yellow eyes stared at me. No hunger, no rage, just a cold, focused hatred that drilled into my soul. The thing in the middle of the room, the harvester, pulsed with that hatred. It was a giant, black heart beating in the ruins of Keller's apartment. A thick, wet sound, a shuddering squelch that echoed in the sudden quiet. My hand was clamped around the remote. It was cold, too cold, a piece of ice in my sweaty grip. I was breathing too fast. My lungs burned. The throb in my head where I'd hit the desk was a drum beat, matching the pulsing of the creature. I was its new target, the new enemy. The guy who hurt its master. A wet, scraping sound came from the corner of my eye. The pulpy ruin that used to be Keller. I shut my eyes tight for a second. Don't look. Don't look. I looked at Dave. He was still out, a crumpled shape near the wall. He was breathing. I could see the small rise and fall of his chest. He was alive. The thought was a tiny flicker of light in a universe of darkness. I had to get him out. I had to get us both out, but the harvester was there, a sphere of eyes and flesh and potential violence, blocking the way to the hole in the wall, the only way back to my apartment. It wasn't attacking. It was waiting. I had the remote. The leash. It seemed to be holding it at bay. For how long? I took a half step back, my foot sliding in the slick black ichor that coated the floor. The monster hissed. A low, vibrating sound. It didn't move, but the 100 eyes tracked my tiny shift in position. It was a warning. Stay put. My mind raced. 1,000 bad ideas at once. Throw the remote? It might attack. Destroy it? It might go berserk. Make a run for it? It was faster. I saw what it did to Keller. I heard the crunch. I was pinned. Trapped in a standoff with a nightmare. Then, the remote in my hand vibrated. It wasn't a phone's buzz. It was a deep, low hum, like a transformer about to blow. It grew stronger, shaking my entire arm. I almost dropped it. A voice spoke, not from the room, from the remote itself. It was a dead, mechanical voice, like a GPS that had learned about damnation. Steward entity terminated, it said, each word a perfect clipped syllable of digital ice. Initiating bond with new wielder. A jolt, not a shock from a wall socket. This was different. It felt like a hook had been slammed into my brain through my hand. Pain, white-hot and blinding, shot up my arm, exploded behind my eyes, and spread through every nerve in my body. I screamed, doubling over. My muscles locked up. I couldn't let go of the remote. It was fused to my hand. And then the images came. They weren't thoughts. They were an avalanche. A torrent of data poured directly into my head, bypassing my eyes, my ears. I saw things, felt things. I felt a hunger that spanned a century, a deep, gnawing emptiness that lived in the foundation of the building. I saw the faces of other tenants, flickering past like slides in a projector. A young woman in the 70s, a stockbroker in the 90s, a family in the early 2000s. All of them in their apartments. All of them alone. All of them disappearing into a wet, black maw. I saw Keller as a young boy, his father showing him the remote. A family secret. A family burden. Their ancestors hadn't summoned the harvester. They had found it here. Trapped it. The building wasn't just a block of apartments. It was a cage. And the steward wasn't a master. He was a jailer. The remote wasn't a controller. It wasn't a weapon. It was a key, a sedative, a tool to manage the prisoner. The high-frequency sound I triggered wasn't an attack command. It was a jolt of agonizing pacification, a cattle prod for a god. I hadn't attacked the beast. I had disciplined it. I had enforced the rules of its own prison. The flow of information slowed to a trickle. The searing pain in my head subsided to a dull, pounding ache. The visions faded, leaving behind a terrible understanding, a truth that settled in my gut like a block of lead. The harvester wasn't some random monster Keller had summoned. It was a warden's problem, a thing that had to be managed. Fed, kept quiet, and Keller, the last in his family line, was gone. The vibration in my hand stopped. I straightened up, gasping for air, the remote still gripped in my hand. I looked at the quivering black sphere. The hatred in its 100 eyes was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Resignation. It knew the rules. It knew what had just happened. I wasn't its enemy. I was its new warden. The mechanical voice spoke again from the device, its tone unchanged. Flat. Final. Bond established. New steward confirmed. A wave of nausea washed over me. I wanted to throw up. Steward. I was the steward. Next feeding cycle scheduled to commence in 365 days. My blood ran cold. Feeding cycle? Procurement of a new offering is required, the voice continued, relentless. Specifications. Subject must be a resident of the structure. Subject must be isolated, lonely, unnoticed if absent. It was describing me. It was describing me a few days ago. It was describing the victims I saw in the flood of images. Failure to comply will result in bond dissolution, the voice stated, with all the emotion of a weather report. My mind latched onto the words. Bond dissolution. That sounded good. Break the bond. Get rid of this thing. Warning, the voice added, as if reading my thoughts. Bond dissolution will trigger a containment failure. The prison will collapse. The entity will be released. I looked at the monster. At the hole in the wall. Beyond it, my own trashed apartment. And beyond that, the city. Millions of people. Millions of unsuspecting, lonely souls. It was a death sentence. I couldn't destroy it. I couldn't run. If I left, if I broke the remote, I would be unleashing this hunger on everyone. It wouldn't just be this building, it would be the whole city. I was chained to this place. Chained to this thing, not for a day, not for a week. You have 365 days, the voice said one last time, before the remote went completely silent and still in my hand. A year. I had a year until I had to find someone else. Someone like me. Someone to feed to the monster to keep it quiet. To keep the prison intact. I had become Keller. My life, my entire existence was now defined by this apartment, this monster, and the horrific choice that loomed a year away. A groan came from the floor. Ugh, my head. Dave. He was stirring. He pushed himself up onto one elbow, his eyes blinking, trying to focus. He looked at the wreckage, at the black slime coating everything. His eyes went wide. What the hell? He whispered. Then he saw it. The massive, quivering sphere of eyes in the center of the room. A strangled gasp caught in his throat. Then his eyes found me. He saw the remote in my hand. He saw the expression on my face. The terror, the shock was draining away, being replaced by a grim, cold emptiness I didn't recognize. "And what is that thing?" he stammered, his voice trembling. "What happened? Where's Keller?" I didn't look at the bloody smear in the corner. I couldn't. I looked at my friend, my only friend, the one person who had come to help, the one person who was now in the cage with me. And I knew I had to get him out. I took a step toward him. The harvester hissed, a low rumble, but it didn't move. It knew. The new steward was in charge. "Dave," I said. My voice was rough, dry. "You need to go." "Go? Go where? We have to call the cops. We have to get out of here." He started to scramble to his feet. "No," I said, the word like a stone. I walked over to him, standing between him and the creature. I was its keeper now. I had to act like it. "There are no cops for this. You just need to leave." "I'm not leaving you here with that," he protested, pointing a shaking finger at the harvester. I grabbed the front of his shirt. I pulled him close, my face inches from his. He flinched at the cold look in my eyes. "Listen to me," I said, my voice low and urgent. "You're going to walk out that hole in the wall, go back to my apartment, and you're going to leave this building. You're never going to come back. You understand? But what about you?" The question hung in the air. What about me? The question was a knife twisting in my gut. I made a choice, the first choice of the new steward. "I died here," I said, my voice flat. "There was a gas leak. An explosion. Keller and I, we didn't make it. That's the story. That's what you tell everyone. That's what you have to believe." Tears welled up in his eyes. He didn't understand. But he saw the truth of my words in my face. He saw that there was no arguing. "Go," I repeated, shoving him lightly toward the opening in the wall. "Go now, Dave, and don't look back. Ever." He hesitated for a second, his face a mess of confusion and fear. He looked from me to the monster and back again. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. He simply nodded, a single, jerky motion. Then he turned and scrambled through the ragged hole in the wall. I heard his footsteps in my apartment, then the sound of my front door opening and closing, and then I was alone. Alone in the ruined apartment. Alone with the monster. Alone with the device in my hand. I was the urban loner. Trapped in my apartment, isolated from the world. It was what made me the perfect victim. And now, it was what made me the perfect jailer. I looked at the harvester. It looked back at me, its 100 eyes filled with a patient, knowing hatred. It could wait. We both could. The clock was ticking. 365 days. To find another a lonely soul. To continue the loop. Oh,